Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for coming to the Heritage Kingston meeting. It's now May, and there's beautiful weather around the corner. I've been saying that for 3 months now. But I did walk here today. Anyway, we'll get right to the agenda. The first thing I have to do, Mr. Clerk, do we have quorum?
Mr. Chair, there is quorum.
Thank you. And just for the members' benefit, how many do we need to maintain for the balance of the meeting? Okay, so we're at minimum quorum right now. I did get a message from one of our members who is coming but will be late. So if anyone has to leave, maybe you could wait until this other member gets here before you do. So we need to approve the agenda, so I need a mover and a seconder for the agenda that's in the package. Moved by Councillor Schell, seconded by Peter. So you see the order. The order is essentially set. It's in the bylaw for committees, so that's why it's in this order. Does anyone have? There is an item of correspondence to add that you should have on your desks. Does anyone have any other suggestions or comments about the agenda as printed? Yes, Don.
Could you or someone make a brief report on the 218 Green Bay OMB hearing?
Is that in correspondence as it is? No. Maybe I'll ask Heritage staff if the outcome of that OMB hearing would be included as correspondence for the Heritage agenda at some point or not.
Through you, Mr. Chair, we can certainly circulate that to members of the committee. We just received it yesterday through legal, so.
Okay, so it's a timely suggestion, so I assume it'll be included in the next package then. And perhaps circulated by email before then, if that's possible. All right, thank you. Any other questions, comments? All right, so the agenda as printed, we need to vote on it. All those in favor? Opposed, and that carries. So the next item is the minutes from last meeting, April 5th. Need a mover that was here present at the meeting. Moved by Don, seconded by Councillor Schell. Any errors or omissions of those minutes? Yes, Don.
Just a minor one on page 13. Near the top, the sentence, the agent responded that the chimney will be removed as it is not an original feature. That wasn't my recollection of what he said. I think what he might have said was that the chimney might be removed. And in fact, I don't think he's intending to remove it. So if you change will be to might be removed.
Okay, the clerk has taken note of that change. Thank you. Yes, Peter?
I would just say that I read that with interest because I made some comments on that which aren't recorded here, but I'm not interjecting at the moment to complain about that, but my remembrance of what was said is entirely consistent with what Don has just said.
Right. I think I recall that as well. Anything else? Okay, then we will vote on the minutes with that change. All those in favor? Opposed? And that carries. Disclosure of pecuniary interest. Seeing none, there are no presentations or delegations. We do have one briefing from Ms. Campbell, Manager Cultural Heritage, regarding the sesquicentennial season updates from the city museums. And I guess we have a 10-minute time allotment for this section, plus questions. Thank you.
I just wanted to take this opportunity to give you all a quick update about the sesquicentennial seasons that are about to begin at the city museums. But that also includes, very briefly, a conversation about City Hall as a National Historic Site, because we have made some changes to the way that we will be interpreting this site in the coming season. And this has happened as a result of consultation with a number of different groups, including the Cultural Heritage Working Group that is part of this committee. So we have heard in the past about the mayor's portraits, the traditional oil painting portraits that are available in City Hall are scheduled to be rehung. And Paul has spoken about this before, Paul Robertson, the city curator, about the reordering of those portraits so that there's a more sort of logical order and presentation of those pieces. Sympathetic to that rehanging, we also have the niche cases that will have new objects on display, objects that are being drawn largely from the mayor's gift collection, as well as some of the mayor's chains of office that have not been on display in recent years or in recent time. New this season, and I'm sure Paul will give a more detailed update at a future point, the Sir John A. Macdonald and the John Counter rooms downstairs will actually be converted into exhibition space for the duration of the summer season. So the Sir John A. room will be a conversation about Sir John A. as a historic and important figure in Canadian history, but also a little bit problematic for some people in terms of how we adjust and focus that history in a modern context. So we're using that space to sort of tell that story of Sir John A. and think about Sir John A.'s legacy in the current world. The John Counter room will be a conversation and exhibition about governance and how this is a seat of active governance. And so we will be looking at when did the voting process come to Kingston, how were people able to participate in that over time, and what are sort of the landmarks for our own local story of how governance is enacted. Kind of appropriate given that we have the by-election occurring at this time. The basement gallery, which has traditionally been referred to as the Royal Way, is being replaced for this season in partnership with Kingston Immigration Partners. It will be a Meet Your Neighbor exhibition, so looking at modern Kingstonians who are part of the diversity of modern Kingston and telling some of the story of what modern Kingston looks like today. The tour season starts May 23rd and will run through October 12th, so you will see people around City Hall during those times. We are also instigating this season basically a sticker process. So if you are at City Hall with a degree of frequency and you see somebody with a yellow sticker on the 3rd floor, that is an indicator that they should not be on the 3rd floor and that we should intervene and direct them back to the 1st floor where they are allowed to be on a self-guided tour. So, as I said, I can't talk in too much detail about any of this given the time constraint, but I also want to give a quick update about the pump house. The pump house has the ongoing renovation work on site. If you've been by the site lately, you will have seen that the rear portion, this picture is actually outdated at this point. There's now block infill. They're getting ready to put up the glazed panels. So the work that's being done on site is moving along quite nicely now. Here again is the artist rendering for what the rear portion of the building will look like. This came to Heritage Kingston before, given that this, as we all know, is a designated heritage site. The show that is opening at the Pump House this season is called Kingston, Believe It or Not. We were challenged to think about sesquicentennial year and how it is that we tell Kingston's story through objects and our city museums. So Kingston, Believe It or Not opens on May 20th. The site will be open, but portions of it will not be accessible. So the train room will be open, the pump room where the historic pumps are located will be open. We will be running a program called Trains and Tots on Tuesdays to replace an older program that used to be called Mummy and Me. We will also have Fortnite on Thursdays, challenge-based, but the core show is Kingston, Believe It or Not. And Kingston, Believe It or Not, is an initiative to take objects that are not often on display via any of the museums in the city for various reasons. Maybe they don't match the mandate, maybe they don't have the space to put them on display, maybe they're objects that were in personal collections that aren't part of curated museum collections. So I'm just showing you two here. One is a limestone deposit that has the Believe It or Not challenge, is that people think it looks like a dinosaur jaw. So it's an opportunity to talk about the limestone formations that are so important to the city of Kingston. And then on the right-hand side is actually a shield from the KP riots that was constructed out of a food tray and some ladies' handbag handles that were available in the workshops on the site. So again, it's an object that we don't often see in rotation on display in the city of Kingston, but it tells a really compelling story about how it is that we arrive in this position that we're in today. There are some other things at the pump house that I wanted to update everyone on. Because the rear portion of the site is going to remain closed until mid-July, we have some challenges on the site, one of which is running programming. So programming at the site typically involves the Discovery Center, which right now is inaccessible due to that renovation. In order to allow for programming to happen, we have to have space to store those supplies, spaces for those students to gather, et cetera. And one of the solutions that we've been working toward is moving the art box. The art box, some of you may be familiar with. It has been out in the community for 2 years now. It is a mechanism by which we've been trying to move arts-based programming into the community in advance of things like the Rideau Heights Community Center coming online. So this summer, that art box is no longer being used in that purpose. So we had an opportunity, and the opportunity that we're working on right now is whether or not we can move the art box to the front yard of the pump house temporarily in order to run summer programming out of the box, and then it will be removed when the site reopens in September, and we can then get back our programmatic spaces. There is the potential that there will be some damage done to the front lawn, and we know this, but we also have in the project earmarked budget for landscape and repair to the front lawn. So for us, this is a mechanism to allow programming to continue at the site in a way that is engaging, that marries arts to the museum experience. We often speak in the tagline of hands-on history. So we're really excited about this because it allows us to really activate the space in this time when the rear portion won't be open. I also just wanted to give you, we get so excited every time we get an update where things are getting done. If any of you remember, and I apologize I don't have a better image of this, the bottom right is a pre-photo, which is largely looking at that City of Kingston Museum sign. But in the rear, you can see the old sidewalk that used to go up to the front door. If you remember, there was like a green, almost like a little green bridge that took you to the front door of the site. It presented a real accessibility concern, and so we did grading and basically leveled out so that the sidewalk actually goes up to the front door and offers a very large pad that makes it very accessible for anyone in a motorized wheelchair or otherwise. The door will also be activated remotely, so we're very excited about this. I just wanted to share this. We will be installing this panel that you see right here. Will be reinstalled just here, parallel to this edge of the sidewalk. There used to be a secondary panel that is essentially behind this sign that used to sort of sit behind the sign on the sidewalk up to the ramp. We're actually removing that sign, so it will not be returning to the site. It's outdated. The material on it is no longer appropriate for the museum, so we've decided to remove it. Just a little foreshadowing very quickly. The pump house will reopen in a grand reopening with all of the new spaces coming online, new installations, et cetera, on September 7th. We will have Out of the Vault, which is an art show coming on. These are objects that are in the Kingston vaults that are part of the Civic collection that rarely go out on display. The Agnes is very kind to store them for us, but they often aren't in a position to put them out. So we will have the Out of the Vault, we will have the Discovery Center reopening, we will also have new wayfinding and site interpretation. Okay, so very quickly then, of course, we have a sister museum, the McLaughlin Woodworking Museum. The show that is opening at the McLaughlin and is open actually currently and will be running until September 3rd is 1 Degree of Separation. 1 Degree of Separation, if the pump house is telling the stories of objects you rarely hear, the McLaughlin is saying, how do objects relate to each other and tell us a story about ourselves? So the play here, you may have heard, 6 or 7 degrees of separation. Kevin Bacon is often referenced in that. This is about 1 degree of separation, and that basically all the objects we have in our collections can be connected by 1 degree. And so it challenges you to think about the ways those objects relate. There's a degree of technology. You have an RFID tag. If you know what that is, it will basically digitally track your movement through the museum, and you will feed into a co-curated museum experience. It's very hands-on. It's very participatory. The objects are themselves no less compelling than those that are happening at the pump house, but the framing around them is slightly different. And these are intended to play off each other. We actually have programming, summer educational programming at both sites that actually speaks to both of the exhibitions for the first time. So we're trying to draw these two pieces together to have a more cohesive experience. The McLaughlin continues to run workshops. There are a number of them happening this summer related to woodworking and handcraft skills. These are available to register for on class if you're interested. They're also available on our website, and you can link through the website to the class system to register. Paddle making is incredibly popular. I believe it's already filled, so we're looking right now at overflow dates. So this is where you actually would build your own paddle. People really seem quite interested in that one. A little foreshadowing, Lumberjack will run again this fall, September 23rd through 24th. The Lumberjack Survival Summit is one of our strongest media communications pieces coming out of the Cultural Services Cultural Heritage team. We get incredible engagement on this. We have 35 participants take part in a 2-day, basically skills building activity series on the site. They camp overnight. They get an incredibly immersive experience and learn a number of things. One of our challenges moving forward is actually that it could grow, but we aren't quite sure how we would support its growth, but maintain the deep level of impactful training that these people are getting. So we've already posted this to social media. It is already our most engaged piece on our social media right now, just speaking again to the strength of this content delivery. We are renaming it this year, though. Survival Summit does seem to be a little intimidating for participants. Very quickly then, new at both museums, we're running curator-led tours on select Saturdays throughout the summer. This is an opportunity in the sesquicentennial year to have those stories, those deeper histories of those exhibitions that are too deep and detailed to put into panels. Have a curator actually walk you through the exhibitions and talk to you deeply about the stories that they learned as part of that creation process of the show. We also have website updates happening. You will see that our websites right now have been changed to parallel each other. They look like mirrors of each other in terms of their content, and we will now be doing an overhaul of their visual identity. This will leak over into our social media as well. And finally, we have an integrated summer student team working at the sites this summer for the first time. We have 12 summer students who've been hired to what we call CHIPS, our Cultural Heritage Interpretation and Programming students, and they will be working at both of the museum sites as well as at City Hall. And again, this is an effort to ensure that we're able to offer the best programming we can at any given moment and not be limited by very restrictive job positions, and have that ability to speak across our sites. So this is happening at the Pump House, this is happening at the McLaughlin, and having that crosstalk be able to happen. So that's my very quick rundown on the season. I'm happy to answer questions if you have them.
Questions from members of the committee? Councillor Schell?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick one. I presume you can get season passes for the museums so that, and any specials for the summer in terms of season passes and costs, or it's the same?
It's the same. So we do abide by the fee schedule bylaw that comes out, and in there, we do have family passes and season passes available for both of the sites. They're very economical, and we do encourage people to purchase a pass if they're interested. If you intend to visit the sites more than twice, they're really the best way to kind of get the best money for your best experience for your money, let's say.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, we're now up to business. The first item in the first couple are placeholders that are not that do not have business items that we're going to discuss today. And the first one with an item is business D, which is statutory business. And the first is an item to do with the Heritage Easement Agreement, Section 37 of the Heritage Act, 320 to 322 King Street East. And there's recommendation, and it will be introduced by staff. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, this application is for to enter into a heritage conservation easement agreement for the property at 320, 322 King Street East. This property is known as the Masonic Buildings. It's located mid-block between Brock and Clarence Streets across from Kingston City Hall. It contains a 3-story red brick commercial building constructed in 1869, and the property is designated under Part 5 of the Heritage Act as part of the Market Square Conservation District. As I mentioned, this application is to request permission to enter into a conservation easement agreement with the city, which would allow the owner of the property to hang and substitute different pieces of exterior art on the facade of the building, which is currently used as an art gallery. It's Studio 22. And the easement agreement would allow the owner to install 2 additional metal brackets on the 2nd story to secure the art, and to install 2 small light fixtures that will sit on the string course in order to illuminate the art from below. The easement would also define a separate process for the applicant to obtain approval from the city when seeking to change different pieces of art. And this process would be the same as the process for any alteration, minor alteration that would go through at the staff level under the procedural bylaw for heritage. The applicant has submitted a proposal illustrating the location, the material, and the size of the brackets and the light fixture types, as well as an example of the type of art they are proposing. The proposed pieces of art will be non-combustible, approximately 7 feet in height, 22 inches wide and 8 inches deep, and weigh approximately 30 to 40 pounds. And the applicant has indicated that the brackets will be fastened to the building facade within the mortar joint to meet the city's masonry policy. So this application came to staff's attention last summer when we were approached by the applicant with this proposal to install a piece of art on the exterior of the building as a sort of extension of the interior exhibition space. So in light of this building being an art gallery and recognizing the proposed manner in which the art would be fixed to the exterior, staff were initially quite supportive of this proposal. However, since it required the ability to substitute different pieces throughout the year, there were some concerns with respect to protecting the heritage attributes of the building and the Market Square district, since subsequent art could have different configurations on the facade. Currently, there are no policies in the Market Square district plan that speak specifically to such a proposal, and the city's procedural bylaw for heritage doesn't include public art as a specific provision as well. However, this easement agreement offers a way to address this issue, especially in terms of timing, since art wouldn't exactly be finished until the artist was finished creating the piece. So as I mentioned, staff have been working with engineering and building to review any safety and safety concerns from that perspective to ensure there'll be no impacts on the heritage attributes and also from the sidewalk below. And I'll just note that this agreement only pertains to the exterior, this exhibition space, which is basically a rectangle in between the two windows on the second story. Any other alterations would require approval through the regular heritage permit process. So this building is designated under Part 5 of the Heritage Act as part of the Market Square Plan. It has been identified as a valuable example of 19th century commercial block architecture in Kingston, and the property inventory and statement of significance notes its simplified brick Italianate influence with a stone base and smooth brickwork above. The key exterior features include the arch window openings with buff-colored brick arches and coin edge treatments. So alterations to heritage buildings can have a negative impact on the character of the district and the building itself. And as such, this proposal will need to meet all the city's policies, bylaws, and guidelines. So while the district plan doesn't speak specifically to this type of proposal, the intent of the policies that are within it inform staff's evaluation. The plan policies on storefronts and awnings note the importance of compatibility with heritage attributes and the individual buildings, and the need to avoid obscuring any significant attributes. The policies pertaining to signage note that introduction of new signs shall be proportioned to fit easily between openings in the facade, and staff have reviewed the submitted materials and are of the opinion that the proposed location of the exhibition space will only obscure just a small portion of the buff-colored brick surrounds on the second story, and only from certain angles. This will be the only attribute that will be affected on the building, and further, the wrought iron brackets that are proposed will have very little impact on the integrity of the building, on the building's heritage value should they need to be removed in the future. The scope of work also includes those two small light fixtures to be installed on the string course. And the applicant has advised that any necessary electrical conduits will be wired from the interior, so they won't be visible from the public realm. The applicant has indicated that the fixtures will be capable of white and colored light, And staff have specified within the easement terms that any white light shall be warm and the intensity of color shall be adjusted to mitigate any potential light pollution in order to be appropriate in the heritage setting. The Heritage Conservation Plan policies on land use also note that community activities are integral to the cultural heritage value and meaning of the district and shall be encouraged and promoted. And art and visual elements such as signage in conservation districts can provide interesting features that reflect a cultural significance in the community. And staff are of the opinion that the appreciation of public art and understanding of these features from the public realm is an example of such a community activity that should also be encouraged. The protection of these types of attributes are also encouraged as per Parks Canada's standards and guidelines for the conservation of historic places in Canada. So this application was circulated internally to various departments. The building department reviewed the submitted materials and are of the opinion that it doesn't meet the criteria for a sign, so no building permit will be required, but any subsequent changes to art will need to be reviewed against the sign bylaw to preserve its intent, and that has been included as a term of the easement as well. And engineering was also circulated and had no objections to the proposal, but did note that an encroachment permit will be required prior to adding the features to the building face, and also a temporary permit whenever they need to switch out the pieces of art. This application was circulated to Heritage Kingston through the DASH program. There were no major concerns expressed with respect to the application. In fact, many members expressed support, as long as there would be no damage to the building and all precautions were implemented. One member did note with respect to a concern with respect to the delegated authority process being used for this type of application, given the lack of a specific policy in the Market Square plan to account for art displays. And they suggested that this type of issue would be one where input from the community would be appropriate. And staff have considered this concern with the applicant. However, since the plan provides broad direction for such an installation, and it requires such a minor alteration to the building, staff would be reviewing any subsequent art to ensure that the heritage attributes of the building and the district would not be impacted, without really commenting on the art itself. This application was also circulated to the Director of Cultural Services, who pointed to some other precedents in the area for public art. He also expressed some concern for lighting of this piece, given that the art gallery uses the window to the left of where they're proposing to highlight some art from the interior. And this was also discussed with the applicant, and they have advised that this was once more of a priority when they were only on a couple of the levels of the building, but now that they own all three, this would be less of a priority, especially if this application moves forward. So given the proposed material and method of installation, staff are of the opinion that the installation of the two new brackets will have no negative impact on the heritage value of the building. And given the commercial nature and identity of Market Square, staff are also of the opinion that the proposal will fit compatibly with the district's sense of character and will meet the objectives of the district plan policies. Thank you.
Thank you. So now questions from members of the committee are in order. Yes, Peter.
Thank you. I find myself a little bit puzzled by this, and particularly one of the puzzles arises from the decision of the building division that this proposal does not meet the criteria for a sign. The signs, the bylaw on the sign business suggests that it doesn't have to be words, it can be a symbol. And surely this is a symbol.
Sorry, Peter, sorry for stopping you. I should have introduced this. The Heritage Committee doesn't have mandate on application of the signs bylaw.
My question is, if it is not a sign, what is it?
Okay. Does staff have an answer to that question?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's not a sign. We're not treating it as a sign. It is a piece of art. It's unique in that way.
Yes, Peter.
My next question then is, given that there is a very elaborate description in the sign bylaw of what signs are and how they're managed, what they can be, what kind of policy guideline exists for art on public walls?
Yes? I think she already answered. It's a unique proposal, so they had to write. They've created this agreement. The signs bylaw does not apply here, and it doesn't matter whether we agree or not. Yes.
Through you, Chair, one of the aspects of this, and we've encountered this with other types of city signage, is that this is artistic expression. One of the things that's also at play is that it is constitutionally protected expression. So whereas a sign tends to be about commercial activity, which can be regulated, when we move into pure artistic expression, you have a greater challenge to regulate it because of the constitutional protection of expression in public spaces.
So there's a fundamental difference between art and signs in the Constitution of Canada.
I'll have more comments when it comes time for comments. Those are my questions at the moment. Thank you.
Yes, so, and only questions to do with the heritage aspect of this proposal. That's our mandate. Other things I will rule out of order. Go ahead, Chairman.
Thank you. Just one specific question about lighting. It's clear how the brackets will go on the wall, but it suggests that the lighting will be powered by an interior source. So is there any indication as to how that interior is getting to the exterior? Number of passages through the wall, is it through brick or is it through wood? How will the electrical service get from interior to exterior?
Ms. Kim?
The applicant is here this morning. Maybe she can speak to that a little bit more specifically.
So you need to come up to the microphone here. Just state your name and you can answer any questions.
My name is Allie Jacob. I'm the owner with my partner of Studio 22. It's my understanding, talking to my electricians, that we would be looking at a direct route from the edge, the ledge where the lighting sits, directly into the building, which sits on the second floor and can be a single point in to the building so that there's no conduit on the outside. There is no wood there, so it needs to go in through whatever mortar or place right at the ledge that it sits to go directly in and to be unobtrusive and directly into the interior of the building.
Thank you. Do you have any more? Yes, Sherman?
I just wonder if there is a policy about how it is of the such attachment, how the brick needs to be protected. Because you drill
Yes,
a
I
hole through the
believe
brick.
we must have seen this before where there were holes drilled in existing masonry. So,
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. The masonry policy does speak to going through the mortar joint. Similarly, if you were going to attach a sign or something else. So in this way, the easement terms would be that anything to do with the masonry would need to meet the masonry policy, so it would need to meet those policies as well, provisions as well.
and I believe the masonry policy, you can find it on the city website. It has the details in it. Yes, Don?
I notice the nature of white light is described as being sort of warm white, not cool white, but the words in the on page 25 where it refers to this leaves open the question of using colored lights. And I guess I'm a little surprised there's no statement on any restriction on the use of colored lights. What's the planning there?
One of the terms in the easement, through Mr. Chair, is that any colored lighting would be subdued so that it would be compatible in to be compatible with the district and with the building itself. So just further to that, when the applicant would submit an application, staff would be reviewing the lighting as well as part of that application.
Sorry, and just to clarify, would that be cultural heritage staff, or which staff that would be looking at that?
Sure. So the intent of this, the way this application would work is it would be the same as any other minor alteration. The applicant would submit an application through DASH, and it would be circulated internally through the building department, engineering departments, and also cultural services. So the director of planning, building, and licensing, in consultation with cultural services, would be giving the final approval.
Thank you. Okay, it's also last chance for questions to the applicant who is here. Seeing none, thank you very much. So we'll move to members of the public. Same thing, you can ask questions of staff. Yeah, so comments or questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for the presentation and the report. A lot of very important detail in there. So I'm going to support the idea. I think it's very creative, would fit in well with the Sesqui lighting plan for City Hall and environs that's been discussed and approved already. I'm not an expert on art. I do appreciate the talent that others have that I don't, so that's my stand there. And I'm a little bit concerned that it could be used as a way of maybe attracting controversy should the artists wish to do so. I mean, often art that is interesting is controversial and vice versa. And everybody is their own judge of what they like, what they don't like, and this sort of thing. So I think that the actual proposal does merit support. I want to wish them well, but I'm just hoping it doesn't turn into something that's strange and would draw attention in the wrong way. Like putting up a nude of Sir Johnny MacDonald, for example, might be the wrong approach on that. But you know, we have a chance to do something different. Market Square is a very historic, very interesting place, and not only in Kingston, but in Canada, and I want to wish them well. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members of the public wish to comment? Please come forward to the microphone and state your name.
Helen Finley, 52 Earl. I have to confess I have not read this presentation, but I am wondering is there any restriction on the material of the sculptures, and is there any restriction on the weight, and how weather might, I don't know how long these pieces are going to be up, might affect the safety of the whole business of getting moisture in a sculpture and then pieces falling off. I know we did have one painting outside the Pilot House, which was a copy of the Turner Fighting Temeraire, and it was a wonderful painting, but eventually it had to come in because the weather got the better of it. And so, and I do think, you know, if a chunk of the sculpture, because they're usually often done on an armature, and so they're applied, and pieces could fall off, and that's a worry. Is there any weight limit on what's being in the agreement?
Thank you. I did see something about weight in the agreement. Maybe staff could address that.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. There's no restriction on material in the terms. There is a restriction on weight. It won't be more than 300 pounds, which is the limit for similar signage through the sign, it's informed by the sign bylaw, and if it was to be more than that, they would need to have engineering drawings. But this is something that would be addressed through the encroachment permit through engineering.
Are there any other comments or questions from members of the public? Seeing none, thank you very much. So we're back to the recommendation that's in the package. Just to give further context, so what you have here is a legal agreement called a heritage easement agreement, and council rules on it. So at this point, we are in an advisory capacity to council about the appropriateness of the agreement, and so it's a yes or no question, really. Do we advise them to give the okay for the agreement? Yes or no? And your comments will be collected by the clerk if you have any. But I would like you to reference your support or non-support to the question at hand, which is really our decision today, is whether we support council's approval of this or not. Peter?
Thank you. My comments in part relate to the legal advice, which is that art is we can't censor it, and that's true. But art is in the eye of the beholder, and there are two things that worry me about this. The first is that, as has already been mentioned by a member of the public, art can be very controversial, and one has to be prepared for that. And I'm not sure that, we're dealing with an easement, and I've got no problem with the legal sense of the easement, but I wonder if we quite know what we're getting into. The second problem, the major problem I have with supporting this particular easement is that if we allow art on the front of this building, and it's declared to be art and not a sign, how are we going to prevent other merchants from saying, well, I would like art on the front of my building, and it might be a Big Mac, or it might be a piece of graffiti, or it might be something very vulgar, but it's art, and since we're not in the business of judging the art that's on the wall, I wonder how, if this is not, I'm worried that this is an invitation to every merchant to think that they have a right to have art on the wall. And if we acknowledge this, I'm not sure that we have a principle to deny anyone else, and I worry about that. So I'm very hesitant to support this, not because I think the easement in itself, the details of it are a problem, but because I think there is I think it sets a precedent which could be a very unfortunate precedent.
Thank you, Peter. Actually, and I apologize, we should move and second the recommendation so that we can debate it, but I'm going to consider your comments in that context. Moved by Mac, seconded by Don. That should have happened before your comments. So, and you're bringing up the precedent is in order. That's exactly the kind of thing that we're supposed to be considering, the precedent that this might set from a heritage point of view. So, so that you're right to bring that up. But again, remember, at the end of the day, we have to either support council's approval or not, and that's it. So you're going to have to decide on that score. Yeah. Yes, Sherman.
I try to think of it from the point of view of applicant wants to display art, and what this does is accurately describe a way in which art may be attached and a volume of space that can be used to display such art. So I think this is a practical guidance to how to give space to public, so to speak, for their distribution of art. It is quite a limited application, and I understand that that is the brackets on wall and light and limited amount of light to illustrate the art. So I think there are appropriate limitations proposed that would limit such an opportunity to display art, but I think it is an appropriate application.
Thank you, Sherman. I think I saw Councillor Schell, and then I'm going to come back. Councillor Schell?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I also support this wholeheartedly. I was thinking of the big picture windows at Studio 22 on the ground floor is a much better spot to have something really controversial because people are just walking right by. The Archaeological Foundation, the City of Kingston gave them a grant to produce a really nice piece of sculpture that was on their wall when they were on Princess Street through a grant in the arts. The alleyway behind Chien Noir has that wonderful sculpture of the laundry up high. It's, you know, and then the pump house, a couple of years ago, they had Shane Dark's sculpture in the front, which is the blue wood that was up in the tree, and, you know, people would walk by and suddenly be surprised by it. It was terrific. So to me, this is another way that the City of Kingston makes itself interesting, an exciting place to be. And with the sculptures changing on a whatever basis it will be, it'll just add to the vibrancy of the downtown. So I'm fully supportive of this. Thank you.
Thank you. Next I saw Dawn.
Yes, I'd like to agree with others that I think it's a wonderful project for the square and for the city, and I think we all like the idea. It's a little unfortunate that it raises all kinds of procedural, legal, and whatever problems. And I hope you're not disturbed by those. I'll make some general comments later, but I'd like to make a specific criticism about colors that I brought up before, and I'd like to make an amendment to the section that deals with the colors of the light. I mean, that is part of the heritage attributes that we're concerned with. It's on page 25. Page 25.
Yeah, and I'm just checking with the clerk of the procedural ramifications of your amendment. Just hang on a second.
Well, I think we should be able to.
Yes, so the correct level for the amendment is on the level of where the recommendation is in the package, so it's right on the top, not in the agreement. The agreement, as stands, goes as an exhibit, and then you would be adding a second clause to the recommendation. So, for example, whatever it is that the change that you see, you would have to write it as a separate clause after the first recommendation, and that the agreement be altered in this way, that kind of thing, because the agreement itself has to go verbatim as the exhibit.
I'm not sure I really understand the legal difficulties. As I understand it, under the Heritage Act, Council has to consult this committee with respect to an easement agreement. That, in my mind, means that our input should go straight to Council. And I'm sort of concerned that it's being blocked or filtered or something like that. But this is, I think, a sensible amendment, and I'm sure staff can deal with it sensibly. But I'd like to make the statement that there's no reason, I see no reason, I don't accept any reason that we can't make amendments to the aspects that deal with the heritage attributes. So,
Look, it's a procedural point, and your amendment can be made, and it is in order, but it has to be made as a separate clause that would read after the recommendation. And you can word it however you like.
yeah. Well, I mean, I'll give it to, I mean, I've written as a replacement of one clause with a new clause. I mean, and I'll leave it to staff how they want to deal with it. If you want to project that, might be useful. It's really quite simple, but the clause 4 says any white light shall be warm white light, i.e. not incandescent or daylight, approximately 3000 Kelvin. And the intensity of any color shall be adjusted so as to mitigate potential light pollution. My proposal is, well, I think there's some confusion about the incandescent. I don't think incandescent means anything in that sense. So what I'm suggesting is that the following words: any white light shall be warm white, maximum color temperature 3000 Kelvin. Any colored light shall be sympathetic to heritage colors in the vicinity. Lighting shall be steady, not flashing or moving. And then the intensity of any light shall be adjusted so as to mitigate potential light pollution. So I think these are sensible clause, and so I hope they can be dealt with.
The clerk is typing it up, and you did include the relevant clause from the agreement that you would like to see replaced.
Yes, that's clause 4, IV.
So we'll just find that in the package here, so
Page
that the
25.
committee can see what we're discussing. It's on page 25 of the package. You see J, Roman numeral 4, is near the bottom of page 25, or page 7 of the exhibit, but page 25 of the package. So it's replacement of that entire clause with the wording as proposed by Don. That's the amendment. We need a seconder. Seconded by Mac. Do you have anything further for the rationale of your amendment?
No.
Okay, does anyone else wish to comment on the amendment only? We're talking about... What's that? Greg wants to say that? Okay, so I guess I'll ask Mr. Newman if staff understands what the amendment is and how it fits in with the agreement, and whether this is appropriate way to word it, if you
Certainly,
understand the wording.
Yes, certainly, thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. The proposed amendment seems fine from the staff's point of view. It doesn't contradict any of the policies of the Heritage Conservation District Plan, and in fact, I think some of the language just reinstills the expectation of staff, particularly with respect to the light being consistent and not being flashing or moving. So I think it's a good amendment, and staff would support its addition.
Okay, so the proposed wording is workable with staff. Is there any other discussion from members of the committee? Peter.
I'm a little bit behind the curve here, but is the amendment will not be added to the recommendation, but will be inserted as J4. Am I correct that that is the way it will be handled?
Mr. McLeod explained to the chair and I that the amendment will be made to the recommendation itself, as the committee does not have the ability to change the easement agreement, which is Exhibit D. So the first clause of the recommendation will appear as it reads in the agenda. And then there'll be a second clause that says that council give consideration to the following addition, or the new proposed wording to the amendment, and then it will list the paragraph as prepared by Mr. Taylor.
Thank you. So Exhibit D will stay as it has been presented, but council will be informed through the recommendation of this to consider the matter of changing in the Exhibit D. Thank you.
Yes, so Councillor Chell and I and the rest of the councillors will see the recommendation that you see in the package, if it passes, plus another clause with Don's wording and the explanation that it replaces that particular part of the agreement. And that's what we would be considering. Yes, Sherman. Sorry, Mr. Newman had a further comment.
Sorry, Mr. Hill, and through you, Mr. Chair. The only thing I would mention is this is an easement agreement to be entered into with the applicant, so we'd want to obviously confirm that the applicant is generally supportive of this amendment before we move to council.
The agreement involves the approval of both parties. Go ahead, Mr. Hill.
Just wonder, in that process, how does council hear of staff's willingness to revise the wording? Wording as proposed, but how is it that staff acknowledges the potential of the change?
So the discussion from today's meeting will be captured in the minutes, which will be provided to council, and as well, members of the planning department are also at council when this matter comes forward, if there's any additional questions.
You still have the floor, Sherman? You're okay? Any other comments on the amendment? Okay, so I'll call the vote on the amendment. You see it up there. So all those in favor? And that carries unanimously. Thank you. So the recommendation now reads that council approve the bylaw to enact a heritage conservation easement under section 37 of the Ontario Heritage Act for the protected heritage property located at 322 King Street East, attached as Exhibit D to report number HK 17-002, and that council
will give consideration to the following amendment to the easement agreement, which is to replace 4.0J, Clause 4, by any white light shall be warm white, maximum color temperature 3,000 degrees Kelvin. Any colored light shall be sympathetic to heritage colors in the vicinity. Lighting shall be steady, not flashing or moving. The intensity of any light shall be adjusted so as to mitigate light pollution. And that's the end of the clause.
Okay, so that is the amended recommendation. Is there any further discussion on the recommendation? Go ahead, Don.
As it's been mentioned, this is a rather unusual situation, and I have sympathy with staff trying to find a mechanism that fits all the requirements and is convenient and satisfies heritage, satisfies the applicants and the city and so on. I have to say I don't think this is the best solution. The real issue is, it's a very complicated process. We have a process of heritage permit applications, and I don't see that it couldn't be, it's a bit unconventional, but I don't see that can't be made to work to everyone's satisfaction. The issues from a heritage point of view is, first of all, whether the artwork might significantly conceal the heritage attributes of the building, or on the other hand, whether it might be inconsistent, incompatible with the square, with the heritage objectives of the district, the appearance of the square and so on. Those are both matters that this committee properly has jurisdiction over, or at least has, sorry, that's the wrong word, this committee is concerned with. The question of jurisdiction has been changing in the previous years. It used to be that for a district such as this, all permit applications came to the committee. And then we had the advice of legal that no, this committee has nothing to do with heritage permit applications in a district. And now, and then later, we had an agreement that says that, yes, in a
Sorry, Don.
Yeah.
Just to clarify for members of the committee and the public, there's actually 3 different processes that we consider. The heritage permit applications, which this is not. Mm-hmm. The suggestions to council in Heritage District, which is an optional process that is separate as well. Although this is in a heritage district, that's not the process that we're following, because this is a heritage easement agreement under Section 37, and Section 37 is another process, and so there's actually 3 different processes, which is why it was a little challenging for us to understand. This is not the same process as a Part 4 or a Part 5 application.
Well, I understand that. What I'm saying is that they could handle this under a permit application under Part 5. The mechanism already exists, and although it's a bit unusual, it's certainly not out of it's not unreasonable for it to be.
Point taken, but the Section 37 language does state that these types of agreements need to be considered by the committee, so it is a different context as the Part 5 language, which Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act has different language than that. So that's the difference here. We're talking about the Section 37 language is what applies here. But anyway, continue. So have the floor.
Well, just to wind up, so to speak, I don't see why the applicants, each time they want to change the art, they can submit a permit application. And if we follow the current sort of guidelines and procedures, staff can circulate it through DASH to this committee, and we could say, yeah, it's all right, it's wonderful. I don't imagine we're going to object, but there may be some unusual circumstances where there might be concerns, but we have a mechanism. I think it works, it will work, it can be made to work. I don't think we need a heritage easement agreement.
Okay, and we will be calling the question on the recommendation at the end of everyone's input. Go ahead, Sherman.
I just wonder if the process could be looked at where it is that it appears the committee is being given a fait accompli to comment on rather than a work in process. I can understand that there's an urgency on applications of heritage permit, et cetera, where there's a time limit. This has been taking a lot of time, so I'm just wondering if it might be better that the creation of this agreement actually be reviewed by committee, not the agreement itself once complete, so that committee has input on the creation of the agreement rather than the written agreement once final. Then there's relative input.
Yeah, well, your comment is being recorded by the clerk, but suggestions to a different process to follow that rather than this one are not relevant to the passing of this recommendation. That's what's on the floor. We have a recommendation on the floor. If these kinds of comments maybe should continue with the discussion with staff offline for the next time a heritage easement is proposed. In this situation, we are asked to consider the recommendation that's in the package, and you have to vote yea or nay. And it's been amended. Any other comments? Yes, Jamie.
This is just a general comment about the application, and I fully support it. I think it's great. And outside of taking reasonable precautions to protect the heritage attributes and the building itself, I just want to highlight the wonderful opportunity the installation of public art in this way is a means to interpret the building and to create a conceptual juxtaposition with its heritage attributes. And whether people love it or hate it, it's going to generate conversation, and people are going to be re-looking at that building in new ways. And I think that's wonderful, and I think it will really enrich the Market Square.
Thank you. I saw Dawn again.
I just want to mention another point that, the staff referred to, and that was my concern that by going this route to a heritage easement where staff are given the authority to approve or not approve a piece of artwork, it's again a concern that a responsibility that the Heritage Committee, which has members from the public to provide input, is being excluded from the possibility of providing input on the suitability of an artwork. The sort of underlying intention of the Ontario Heritage Act and so on is that the voice of the community, well, heritage belongs to the community, and this committee is an opportunity for the community to provide input to council on decisions like this. And this easement agreement, although it's a tempest in a teapot, you might say, a teacup, is taking away the authority of this committee to have any input into the decision as to whether to approve or not approve a piece of artwork. For that reason, I'm going to vote against it.
Thank you. I'm not going to allow a protracted discussion about the choice of staff to use a heritage agreement or not. That's not in order. What's in order is whether or not you support its use. Yes, Peter.
This is really a question of information. Is my reading of the easement agreement correct in my conclusion that the staff are not going to judge the suitability of the artwork on any other grounds, but that it meets the criteria as set out in the easement, which are size and weight and things like that? I didn't see anything in the easement which I took to involve artistic judgment on the part of the staff. Am I correct in that?
It's an excellent question, Peter, but again, not relevant to the recommendation that's on the floor. The art is protected as freedom of expression under the Constitution. We are all subject to that law, and we don't have to agree with it. It's just the way it is. Commissioner Hurdle, did you have something to say?
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to clarify for the committee that there will be public input in the selection. There is a public art working group that will be involved in the selection, so recognizing this is about public art. So I just want to reassure the committee and the community that this is not going to be just one or two staff members selecting, but the community will be involved as well.
Yes, but it's my understanding that the owners of the gallery can select the art that they wish to exhibit, and because it's artistic expression, it's protected under the Constitution.
Yes, that's correct. It would be more of information and advice that would be provided, or any comments that they may have, so that there would be a working relationship there. Yes.
So back to the recommendation. On the floor, any other comments? Any debate? No? We'll call the question on the recommendation as amended. All those in favor? Opposed? And that carries. Thank you. And good luck. The next item on the agenda is item 2, application for heritage permit under the Ontario Heritage Act, 71 Brock Street. And there's a recommendation with 9 conditions. Go ahead, Mr. Leary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The subject property is 71 Brock Street. It's on the north side of Brock Street between King Street East and Wellington. The application for alteration is under Section 33 of the Act and has been submitted to request an alteration to the rear stone wall opening at 71 Brock Street, which looks like that. The purpose of the application is to facilitate the establishment of a commercial patio for the tenants of 73 Brock Street, which is the Maziki Cafe and Whiskey Bar, and to provide additional emergency egress for the residents of the upper floors of 73 through 79 Brock Street. The alteration proposed includes the expansion of the existing opening and the limestone wall, the construction of concrete steps created at the base. One will be at the grade of the rear yard of 73. A new metal gate with latching mechanism and steel rails, handrail is proposed, and these details are in your agenda package. The property is designated under Part 4 of the Heritage Act in 1981. And while the designation bylaw for 71 Brock Street does not specifically mention this rear stone wall, the feature is an early and or original feature and adds to the character of the property. The existing opening has stone voussoirs as well as a heavy timber lintel that are to be retained. In order to meet the building code, the rear exit handrail is required, and to clarify in the report, given the proposed width, now that it's been reduced with the gate mechanism, the handrail is only proposed or required actually on the one side. However, staff don't have any significant concerns with this handrail. However, it is recommended that the color, profile, and material of the handrail and the gate be as inconspicuous as possible. Simple black or blending to the color of the hardware proposed, as not to detract from the wall itself. Further, a high contrast strip is required at the nose of the stairs in order to meet the building code requirements. Staff have communicated with the applicant a preference to use a tape as opposed to paint for reversibility purposes. Staff also understand that black is a high contrast color and recommend that in lieu of a bright color such as yellow in this situation. The proposed steps are to be concrete with limestone risers, and staff do not object to the proposed use of concrete, as this is a modern intervention into an established heritage fabric. The concrete will also help to clearly distinguish the old wall from the new intervention in keeping with best practices. The use of bright white concrete, however, is discouraged as it'll detract from the heritage value of the structure, and staff have included a condition that the concrete be tinted gray in order to blend more seamlessly with the wall itself. The patios and rear courtyards are a significant part of Kingston's identity. The proposed alteration will permit the installation of a new commercial patio for the adjacent business. The completed alteration will aid in enhancing and conserving the heritage character of this space and its surroundings. Upon review of the applicable material, the application materials, as well as the applicable policies, staff have no concerns with this application, subject to the conditions outlined. We circulated this application internally, and I would note, building raised a couple of matters that have been addressed. One was the contrast strip, which is being required. The other being the locking mechanism. This was also raised by fire as well. The gate is to control access from the courtyard at the rear of 71, which is Chez Piggy, I think. And however, it is to be an emergency access from the rear of the courtyard at 71, which is Maziki Cafe, as well as the residents who live upstairs from that residence. So they need to be able to get through this gate easily in an emergency. However, we don't want the opposite coming from the other direction. So this locking mechanism is what's proposed. These additional plans were included in as an addendum today. The idea is it's a bit of a crash pad in a sort of a discrete manner in order to provide easy access through this. And that is meeting the requirements of both fire and building. This was also circulated to members of this committee through the DASH program. Most of the comments we received indicate an overall support for this application. There was one matter that came up regarding the design of the proposed gate. It was suggested that the applicant consider adding ornamentation to the design of the new gate in order to complement the age and heritage character of the wall. Staff forwarded these comments to the applicant, and the plans before you are revised slightly from what was originally submitted to include a little more decoration on the gate. And while staff don't object to the approval of the gate as proposed, a more decorative gate would also be appropriate, and we have included a condition to encourage the applicant to consider a design that adds a bit more ornamentation. So that was included. So, Mr. Chair, upon review of all of our submitted application or submitted material and best practices, we recommend support of this application.
Thank you. Questions only from members of the committee? Yes, Peter.
This is a bit of confusion on my part. I'd like to have clarified. It says the gate will be closed at all times except in the case of an emergency situation. But the eMusiki is going to have a patio behind this property, behind their current property, and it would seem to me that anyone could go from anyone on the eMusiki patio could open that gate and get into the patio behind Atomic and Chez Piggy and not go the other way around. I mean, I understand that it would have to be opened, by tenants perhaps above the living above the eMusiki, but how does it prevent people from the eMusiki patio from simply being able to walk out by using the same crash mechanism? I don't understand how the words that it will be locked at all times except in an emergency.
Mr. Chair, I've never operated a restaurant before, but the applicants are here to speak to this. It would be the responsibility, as I understand it, of the restaurant itself to ensure that does not happen. However, the way that the emergency egress fire plan is set up for this building, that ease of access needs to be there. So I don't know if the applicants, as I said, are here, if they would wish to add to that statement.
In my mind, I'm thinking like the emergency exits from the hospital where I work, which it says emergency exit only, do not open, alarm will sound, that kind of thing. Patients still use it sometimes and set off the alarm, but it is indicated that it's for emergency exit only. I don't know if that's what the applicants had in mind, but if you wish to comment, you can come forward. Any microphone, there's one right there.
Good day. Michael Deluge, property manager for the Springer Group of Companies, representing the landlord as well.
And Chris Clendenning, I'm owner of Musiki Cafe.
So the desire originally was to have the gate left open during business hours, but the agreement that we have with the neighboring property for the right-of-way across the property is defined specifically for emergency egress only. And the comments from the fire department were very explicit that the gate could not be locked in any way, that it was an egress route and it needed to be latching only with one mechanism for exiting that needed to be simple and no special tools required. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions from members of the committee? I guess I'll ask one. It may be obvious, but just for members of the public, I guess to the owner. So the reason for the proposed change is to allow the patio to be usable as part of the restaurant because it is not usable under the fire code in the current state. Is that correct?
Yes, under the fire code, they won't allow us to have people back there because there's no safe exit egress except for back through the actual cafe. Okay,
so if passed and if the work is successfully completed, what kind of use would you see? Would the public be could they anticipate in that space? And what could you just sort of describe what it looks like and what would be done there?
Well, we'd be having a little bit of a decking area and tables and chairs. Just mainly people out having coffee and drinks. Up to this point, it's been a bit of a black hole. You know, nothing was really there. Lots of overgrowth, and people kind of sneaking in back there. But with this, it'll brighten up the whole area actually, and hopefully encourage just a better atmosphere, and generally it'll look better and be part of that whole walkway in the back, and yeah.
Members of the committee? Yes, Don? Questions at this point?
Yes, the latest version of the gate that we've been circulated with is different from what we saw up there. I think, the gate is now about 2/3 of it has those little circles, and then the remainder has very close bars only. And I'm guessing that the intention was to prevent members of the public from reaching through and releasing the crash bar. So is that the purpose of that? And is it possible to do a bit better than that? I mean, I'm not too impressed with the way the final design is. It's really, I think, you know, I see the clause saying they should consider a more decorative design, but I think the current design isn't really very successful, as shown on this handout. So is it possible for an improved design of the gate to be developed that would satisfy everybody?
Is that a question for the applicant or for the for staff who's processing it?
Both, I guess.
Okay, would anyone like to take that question? Yes, go ahead.
Yes. So do we have a picture? I believe there's a picture showing the original gate or the existing gate that's there, if it's possible to move back to
Just
that.
if you could just turn on your microphone there. Yeah.
Sorry. Yep.
Yeah, there you go.
If we could back to the existing gate that's there. So it's currently two pieces, but all that's there is basically relatively simple straight metal. So the original design was trying to mimic that, except with a solid one-piece gate instead of two-piece. So just with simple straight bars. There was a request for some more ornamentation, so the circular pieces were added to try and accommodate that. But we can certainly see if we can come up with something better. But correct, it does need to be close enough or secure enough to keep somebody from reaching through and releasing the latching mechanism.
Okay, I'm looking for we'll go to members of the public first. Please come forward, state your name, and make your comments or ask your questions.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Frank Dixon, Williamsville resident. I'm really very happy to see this project coming forward. I enjoyed live music in the space 2 or 4 years ago, and then I knew it was closed because of the concern that has been raised with the solution now available. It's really a magical space back there. Am I in Kingston or am I sitting on the coast of the Mediterranean somewhere? It's that kind of setting. Safety would be a concern, and going along with what Retired Professor Taylor was talking about, I also saw some possibilities for further improving the design and to take away the possibility of small animals getting in and out would be a concern there, squirrels or that kind of thing. Could get in maybe unintended and then be trapped in there not knowing how to get out, that kind of thing. So looking at the heritage aspects more, there's not too much in the report on that. It's a very interesting space back there. It's kind of a continuation of the 3 entry panels that come off Princess, King, and Brock. So the interior courtyard of Chez Piggy and then the Toucan and those sort of places. And then on Brock Street, you have Le Chat Noir, right? So I would like to know more about how that kind of got where we are today. So isn't really with respect to the actual design of the gate and its opening, but just sort of going forward on that, part of the historic downtown, close to Market Square. It's just very interesting. People have asked me, how did it get like this? I don't really know. So I'm fully in support of it. I'd like to see it happen as soon as possible so that we can take advantage of the space this summer for music back there. Thank you.
So we'll take all the submissions from members of the public, and if there's any questions, they can be addressed at the end.
Helen Finley. I can give you and Frank a bit of history of this interior block space. Many years ago, I was on the Mayor's Downtown Committee when Val Swain was the mayor. And one of the things I did was do a survey of the block interiors, which were not very inviting, I have to say. Most of them seemed to be urinals behind the bars. And that was this area as well. And of course, Kim Donovan has done some wonderful things in that area. This was a stable area. I mean, that can be misinterpreted. This was an area that was a stable. Horses were back there. So the idea of tarting up the fence, I think, is absolutely wrong-headed. And it needs to be a simple fence in order to be as close to authentic, and that's one of the things we're sort of holding on to with our heritage, is to keep it as authentic as possible. This is not, I know this design is not New Orleans, but that's where you're going. And there were actually, when they did the film about New Orleans, people said, oh, that iron looks wonderful. We should keep it. Well, for Kingston's heritage, it's just dead wrong. And so the very simplest design that is practical and is replicating as close to what would have been there is the best. So please don't decorate it up. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members of the public? Seeing none, we'll now move to committee debate. So I need a mover and a seconder for the recommendation. Moved by Mac, seconded by Councillor Schell. So I'm just going to go back there. So you'll see that basically there's a clause describing the work and then 9 conditions such as the masonry restoration and the conditions that you see in the package there. I'm not going to read them all out. You've all read them. For the debate, maybe I'll kick things off by just on the point just raised by Mrs. Finley on the plain versus ornate nature of the gate. Who would like to make the case for whoever suggested initially that maybe some ornamentation be added, and maybe we should deal with that aspect? Yes, Sherman.
I know I made a comment that if there is proof, if there is, and it appears to be, proof of what once existed and the simplicity of that design, that simplicity should be carried forward in the replacement design. To decorate would probably be inappropriate unless it is that nothing was there before. So I would encourage that the simplicity be included in the design of the gate to replicate more closely the type of structure that was once there, but also emphasizing very clearly the utility of this, that it is an egress, it's an emergency exit. So we can only go so far as to decorate it beyond not impeding upon its utility. That is, being able to reach through, etc. So I think the design does need to be flexible so that it can meet the required utility, but be simple in its decorative nature.
Thank you. Maybe we could just ask staff, do we have any evidence of what the authentic look of this type of gate in that setting would have been? Like, is what was there with the half gate, is that authentic? Is that from the period? And if not, do we have any other evidence?
Mr. Chair, I'm afraid our information is pretty limited when it comes to what this previously was. I've seen some indication that it may have been a bottom part of a building, so it was likely a window. But beyond that, it's only speculation, and we don't have anything proof to show what it actually was originally. So.
And we don't have any policies for ironwork, heritage ironwork, or anything like that?
Only best practices, Mr. Chair, as far as you want something that works functionally for its purpose, yet not take away from the heritage character of that wall, of that feature, and of that character of the patio in the rear of these buildings. So you don't want the door to be the focal point, you want the wall to be the focal point.
Thank you. Anyone else? Don.
I guess I was originally thinking that it needed a bit more decoration, partly because further along in the walkway towards Chez Piggy, there are iron railings with the sort of characteristic arrowheads along the tops of the stone walls, and I thought maybe they should be compatible with that. But that's not a strong argument, and I guess now that we realize that this is not a gate, it's a barrier, that the case for arguing a more decorative treatment is maybe not so strong. So I don't have a strong feeling about trying to improve. Well, what we have there, I'm not too impressed by. What we have in this thing is, I think, not good. I think it might as well just be plain vertical bars rather than kind of a little bit of decoration that doesn't fit anything.
Okay, well, I think it might be time to introduce an amendment then, and it's a simple one. I'm going to move it if I can find a seconder. So, Mr. Vice Chair, if you don't mind taking the floor, or taking the chair, and I'll take the second item before.
Yes, and I recognize you.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. So I'm going to suggest that we consider omitting condition number 3, which reads, the applicant consider a more decorative design for the new gate in order to reflect more closely the area of the stone wall. Just simply deleting that condition. That's my amendment. So,
right. Is there a seconder for the amendment? Peter Goheen?
Yeah, so just to further comment on what's already been said, I agree with Ms. Finley. If this was once a stable, you can easily go wrong trying to go in a direction of something that's prettier or more ornate, and it's not, and like, as she said, wrong-headed. I agree with that. This is intended to be an emergency exit, and it doesn't need to draw attention to itself, so I think the simpler the better. And I don't think the applicant would have a problem with that, because simple can be done. It leaves lots of flexibility for design, so I think it's a win-win, and that's the rationale for deleting that. And having heard from the vice chair who had suggested it and he's given his reason, and I actually guessed that would be that's the reason, because I am familiar with those other iron the arrowheads he's talking about, and that. It's possible that the decision that went into that ironwork was a different context and not applicable in this case. So that's all I'm going to say on that.
Is there other discussion on the amendment? Liz?
Thank you. I'd like to just check with staff. The design that we're seeing on the screen has the little circles. And is that what is in the package? That is what will be built under this? The other bit about the decorative was going to be adding to the circles or something.
Mr. Chair, through you, the decorative one that we saw before us with the little circles is actually, I think, about a second or third rendition. The original rendition that was circulated to the committee didn't have the circles, just simple straight bars, which I get the impression that's more of what the committee is looking for. So we would likely go back to those.
I believe there's a condition in there that that staff be circulated the final drawings, so we can ensure that the desires, the recommendations of this committee are followed through when this is eventually submitted for permit.
Just further to that, I don't know a lot of horse stables, but most of them don't look like jail cell doors. They usually have wood on the bottom and maybe some bars on the top. I don't know what that would have looked like back in the 1800s, but I would imagine Musiki would rather have something with a little decoration like that than a gate that looks like a jail cell door. So I'm happy with that. I certainly don't need to see lots of curlicues, as has been mentioned, but I really don't think that we should also limit them to something that's absolute straight jail bars for what is to be a decorative patio where people are having a drink, not feeling like they've been enclosed. So I'm happy with that design, and so long as I don't want us to be saying has to be just straight bars. Thank you.
Okay, as Ryan pointed out, if this amendment is approved, there is still a provision under item 9 that the final drawings will be seen by the staff, and they can contact us if they feel the need. So that may affect people's decisions. Other comments on the amendment? Discussion? Ready for the motion on the amendment to omit item 3 of the recommendation? All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Return the chair.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Yes, yes, and I agree with Councillor Schell that even without, and what the Vice Chair said, even without that condition, staff still has the ability to review the plans and perhaps, I mean, one of the problems with that condition is that it has a comparative. It says a more decorative design, but it doesn't say more than what. So it wasn't really helpful anyways. But anyways, we've had the amendment. I guess we're back to the recommendation as stands with one less condition. Is there any other debate? Okay, seeing none, I'll call the question on the amended recommendation. All those in favor? Opposed? And that carries. Good luck with your work. Next up, number 3, heritage permit for 60 to 68 Rideau Street. Again, with a recommendation. It's just the work and the two conditions. It's just the bottom of this page 3 of the agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This application relates to the property at 6068 Rideau Street. It's located on the west side of Rideau Street between Ordnance and Bay and contains a 2-story front gabled limestone building originally constructed as a school in 1868. It's designated under Part 4 of the Heritage Act in 1987. It's currently being used as a local private school known as Kingston School. So this application has been submitted to request approval to install 2 new signs on the exterior of the building at 66 Rideau. A projecting sign to be installed on the limestone portion of the building, centered above the left picture window, and 1 wall sign to be attached above the doorway of the modern wood addition to the side. The applicant has indicated that the projecting sign will be traditional looking, rectangular shaped wooden sign with the Kingstown logo on either side. The wooden portion will be 30 inches tall, suspended from a steel pipe that will project 36 inches from the building, and the sign will be attached in the mortar joint to meet the masonry policies, as well as with 2 guy wires for support. The applicant has also indicated that the wall sign will be similar in design to the projecting sign, featuring only the school's name and colors, the royal blue and white. It's proposed to be 48 inches in length, 24 inches and 24 inches in height. The sign will be fastened to the wood exterior wall of the modern portion of the addition, centered above the doorway. So this property is designated under Part 4. The reasons for designation note that it was built as a school in 1868 by John Power with an 1877 addition. And in spite of modern stone windows, the broad gable front of this limestone building with its arched doorway topped by 3 round arched windows and bracketed eaves is a significant part of this early important street. The architectural description in the heritage volumes on file provides further detail, noting that it was constructed in 1868 with some additions, not too long later, which the school was actually built to replace 2 other schools in the area. And then by 1919, the school was actually too small, and it was sold in 1922 to the Coca-Cola Bottling Company, which then sold it to Thomas and Donald Lemon in 1961. So the description notes that this property has undergone a number of changes to accommodate commercial uses, such as the large windows on either side of the main entrance and the garage door on the south side. It also appears that the arched triptych window in the second story has been restored. So the design of the school's main entrance and the highly visible facade of this building are important from a conservation perspective. Any alterations to this facade could impact the heritage character of the building. And there have been unsympathetic alterations in the past, including the addition of the picture windows and commercial style additions, which makes any further additions an important consideration. So this application notes the proposed new signage, including the projecting sign on the front of the limestone building and the wall sign on the side addition. The modern wood side addition was likely constructed in the 1970s as per aerial imagery and has no heritage value. So given the scale and proposed location, the wall sign will have no impact on the heritage attributes of the property, and staff have no concerns with its proposed installation. With respect to the projecting sign, the applicant has indicated that the steel arm and guy wires will be attached to the limestone facade in accordance with the masonry policy in order to avoid irreversible damage to the stone, and it will be centered over the left picture window. The material size and design that's proposed will be compatible with the building's character and will be in keeping with similar installations throughout the building's history. Documents on file suggest that the building once had a similar sign projecting from the center of the facade. So staff are of the opinion that if this projecting arm were to be installed towards the edge of the facade, the symmetry of the building would be impacted since most of the features are centered on the facade. So staff support the design, materials, location, and scale of this sign as it meets best practices in heritage conservation. And the installation of both signs will not impair the integrity of the building's facade should they be removed in the future. And ultimately, these signs will help enhance the visibility of the school as pedestrians and motorists navigate their way along Rideau Street. So this application was circulated internally to a variety of departments who had no objections. This application was also circulated to the committee. A concern was noted from one of the members with respect to placing the sign for the limestone on the limestone building and the potential for it to detract from the center triptych window, and it was suggested to move it to the side closer to the edge of the facade. As I mentioned, staff considered this comment and forwarded it to the applicant. However, are of the opinion that if it were to be installed nearer to the edge, it would have an impact on the symmetry of that front-facing facade. A suggestion was also made for the requirement for more detailed plans for similar types of signage, including dimensions of adjacent features and the scale of installations in relation to each other in order to convey the full impact of the sign. And staff have considered this comment and may require additional plans for future signage applications, but we're of the opinion that what was submitted, staff had no concerns with what was submitted as part of this application. And finally, concern was noted for the projecting sign regarding potential vulnerability to strong winds. This application was circulated to engineering and building, who had no concerns to this respect. However, the building official did suggest this could be mitigated by attaching the sign by a swing chain, and the applicant has indicated that they are happy to do that, make that change to the design. So staff recommends approval of this application, subject to the conditions outlined within.
Thank you. Questions only from members of the committee? Yes, Sherman.
If it appears that a sign originally was over the door, why is that not a logical location for the new sign to be centered along door and window in the middle of the building?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It was considered to be installed under the triptych window and above the arch of the main facade, but it was felt it would be more impactful to the stone on above the archway as opposed to further over above the picture window.
Any other questions from members of the committee? Okay, we'll go to members of the public.
Helen Finley. I just want to comment that the putting in signs is a way of getting business and making your place look for people to focus on. But when I look at this photograph and think, well, would I think of sending my child to this school? I'm thinking, why is that car in front marring the very nice background of the building and illegally parked? So you can put up all the signs you want, but if you don't pay attention to those things, then I think it may be a kind of losing cause. But to put some landscaping in front of that, which would prevent the front yard parking and would also take an opportunity of that wonderful front facade, which is really quite stunning. And a little bit of landscaping could make that happen.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from members of the public? Seeing none, we'll move back to the recommendation in committee for debate. Who would like to move it? Moved by Councillor Schell, seconded by Dawn. It's now on the floor for debate. Would anyone like to say anything? Mr. Vice Chair, I would like to comment.
I recognize you.
Thank you. I couldn't agree more with the last comment about the parking. It seems a little bit incongruous for us to be debating the appropriateness of this sign when the facade is obviously impacted visually by the presence of cars if they're allowed to park there. And I would further say that if, even further than landscaping, if this was converted back to a schoolyard, which it probably was at the beginning, with no parking and no asphalt, it would be much closer to the original purpose that the building was built for. And seeing as this is a primary school, I would suggest that it's a much better use of that space than parking a car. But that is not what we're here to discuss. We're here to discuss the installation of signs. So I'm in favor of that, and we'll be supporting the recommendation. Thank you. Okay, would anyone else like to debate? Okay, well, we're going to vote on the recommendation as stated in the package. All those in favor? Opposed? And that carries. And we still have several items on the agenda. Unfortunately, I need to go to the bathroom, so I'm going to call a 5-minute recess, and we'll come back. I'm anticipating at least another hour, so we're going to be going into the lunch hour as well. So does anyone need more than 5 minutes? No? Okay, 5-minute recess. I see we have quorum in the room. A couple members not at the Horseshoe, but that's okay. We're going to restart here. So we're now at the Heritage Property Grant applications, page 4 of your package. There's a number of grant applications here that come out of our grant funding, and it looks like Mackenzie's here to introduce them.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. This provides an overview of 8 applications for a Heritage Property Grant. So on March 1st, the city started accepting grant applications for the Heritage Property Grant Program. This is for 8 applications, which are tied to heritage permits that staff have delegated authority. All of these properties are designated under Part 4 or Part 5 of the Heritage Act, being those in the Sydenham Heritage Area Conservation District or the Berryfield Conservation District. The Heritage Property Grant Bylaw defines eligible work as those which conserves or enhances the character-defining elements of a heritage property. And it also notes that the amount of a grant awarded shall not exceed 50% of the total cost of the eligible work or $2,000, whichever is less. So the first application is for 176 Mowat Avenue. It's located on the west side of Mowat. It's designated under Part 4, and the applicant is proposing to repaint the wooden portions of the subject building, including the window and door trim, soffits, and fascia, the front porch and rear additions to match the existing. 704 Hillview Road, it's located on the north side of Hillview Road. It's designated under Part 4 of the Heritage Act, and the applicant is proposing to repair 2 west side stained glass windows in accordance with the city's windows policy in heritage buildings. This application is for 109 and 111 Wellington Street. It's located on the west side of Wellington Street. These properties are designated under Part 5 of the Heritage Act as part of the Old Sydenham Conservation District. The applicant is proposing to repair the 2-story front porch, make some minor masonry repairs to the foundation and some bricks, as well as replace the 2 1970s storm doors on the 2nd floor with salvaged wood doors. 249 Main Street, it's located on the west side of Main Street, north of Wellington in Berryfield. It's designated under Part 5 as part of the district, and the applicant is proposing to renovate 4 upper story windows, including the replacement and repair of the wooden sills and replacement of the existing storm windows with custom-made wood storms in accordance with the city's policy on window renovations. 211 Berry Street, located on the east side of Berry Street. It's designated under Part 4. It's also part of the Old Sydenham Conservation District. It's also subject to a heritage easement agreement. The applicant is proposing to replace the 5 existing wood storm windows on this apse section of the church, as well as repair the frames of the interior glass units. 30 Sydenham Street, it's located on the west side of Sydenham Street. It's designated under Part 4 of the Heritage Act and is located in the Old Sydenham District. The applicant is proposing to repoint and repair the southwest wall in accordance with the city's policy on masonry restoration. And finally, 3722 Highway 2, it's located on the north side of Highway 2. It's designated under Part 4 of the Heritage Act, and the applicant is proposing to repair and repaint the barrel vaulted front porch. So staff have reviewed the submitted information alongside the heritage designation bylaws. Property evaluations and easement agreements were applicable for these properties, and each property meets the terms of the Heritage Grant Program as eligible properties. To qualify as eligible works, the proposed alterations must conserve and enhance the existing attributes of the property, and the alterations proposed on the various properties include repainting, repointing, repair of existing windows, as well as the replacement of storm windows and the repair of existing features. So this application was circulated to the city's Financial Services Department to ensure there are no unpaid taxes or other monies owing to the city on the subject properties. Financial Services has confirmed that all of these properties are eligible for grant funding, and none have received Heritage Grant funding in the last 2 years. And And this is the beginning of the grant program, and there are enough funds in the budget to cover the properties included in this report. Thanks.
Thank you. Questions from members of the committee? Questions only at this point. Don?
In the past, I've been concerned about getting enough information. There's a statement somewhere in this pile of pages that more information or detailed information is available on Dash. I went to Dash to try to find out more information, for instance, some plans and details and so on. I couldn't find anything there. I mean, there's an entry there, there's an address there, but it just says an application has been submitted or something like that. No information. So are we, I guess, why aren't we getting the information, and why isn't Dash providing the information?
I guess in relation to, the information that staff would have been processed when they approved the permit, is that what you're talking about? That kind of information?
I mean, for these particular applications, the committee members, knew nothing about them until we saw this agenda. And I guess if there might have been more information on Dash that was removed when the permit applications were approved. So we have no way of seeing that other than randomly going through all the planning applications on Dash to see if there's something of interest to us. That's not.
I can help there.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair, I guess we would need to connect with Mr. Taylor about the specifics of what's missing, because it's our understanding that when we get an application for a heritage permit, the permit itself, all those details, the drawings, the application form itself are being uploaded into Dash. So if you have a specific file where you were not able to find those details, then we would want to look at that. Maybe it was missed, it shouldn't be, but all those details are being uploaded in Dash. Even for the delegated authority permits, we are running those as staff through Dash so that the public have awareness of the fact that we are processing these applications.
Well, I think there's an obvious procedure that's missing here. The committee should be advised every time a heritage property, whenever there's an application for a heritage property, we should be advised. Go to Dash and look and see. At the moment, we have no way of knowing what's being proposed until it's done.
Yeah, so the clerk's just reminded me that we do get notification on a quarterly basis of all the heritage permits that are approved under delegated authority. It's quarterly, and that if you need further information, I guess this is my comment as chair, if you need further information to consider whether or not we ought to give a grant for this work, then more information than what was provided with this package, you would have to get that from staff before the meeting, and staff is saying that everything should be available under Dash, so maybe they'd have to work with you directly. I know at one point I had Dash access, but I wasn't having access to all the files. There was a computer glitch under my login at one point, so I don't know if that's the case for you, but it's something you might need to troubleshoot with a member of the computer staff. So that is definitely always an option to get further information, but I encourage members of the committee to do so before the decision point comes, which is now. So right now we have to decide whether to approve these grants or not.
Well, I hope that staff will take note of the sort of circumstances that are that are happening now. Basically, we didn't know about any of these properties until we got the agenda. There's no time to get more information, no time to ask staff to provide more information. It was there on Dash, but it's been removed. At least I think it's been removed. I can access those property listings on Dash, but the information is gone. So there has to be an improvement in the procedure. So that's my first point.
Okay, well, I'll ask staff that you work with Mr. Taylor before the next meeting and make sure that he has full access to all the information on Dash, that could, whether it's an issue with the program itself or his login or whatever it is, if he could help him with that so that he can get that information. Thank you. Peter? No, you're just putting your hand up. Okay. So we're still in questions here. Yes, Sherman?
On last page 156, the comment of work or scope of work that is being done suggests that it's going to take the negative slope out of the roof, out of the eave of the roof, and supply and install new pillars. I didn't see anything that actually indicates that there's guidance as to how those changes are being made. I presume that they are in the heritage permit that was given to this, and I would recommend that in order to guide us, it would be good to have access to the permissions that were given so that we see that the work that we are providing funding for is approved work. We're making the assumption that it is, but there are changes indicated here that I couldn't check, and I'm just curious to have how to patch that up so that it looks like we're seeing that we're cognizant of the work that we're approving the funding for.
Okay, so I'm just thinking of the procedure. So the options at our disposal are we approve the grants today, or we defer that approval for the purpose of seeking further information. Those are our two options. So if there's nothing else procedurally that we can do, the information about each address is here. We've been told that each of these these addresses received a heritage permit under delegated authority, and we're not given all the details of that in the package. So that's the situation that we're in. Yes, Sherman.
Question then. I'm not familiar with what it is that the heritage permit looks like that is given under delegated authority and the detail of which they are presented. So I guess can I find those permits online under these addresses that would describe the work appropriately?
Yes, through Mr. Chair, that would be correct. The scopes of work will be on Dash as one of the documents that are uploaded in the document section in Dash.
Yes, I just want to remind the committee that we do have, we ought to have access to everything that staff has access to. That was the whole point of getting us access to Dash in the first place. So if that's the case, you get the package, and if you want all the details, it's up to you to look them up before the meeting. And I understand the timelines are very tight. So that's questions. If you have further questions, go ahead. Otherwise, I'll go to members of the public.
Yes. Well, I have questions about several. I mean, as a consequence of not being able to see plans and so on, I don't really know whether I'm justified in approving grants, but in a way, it's just penalizing the applicants when the permit application has already been approved. But I'm particularly concerned about there are two applications that deal with stained glass windows, and in both cases, there's a reference to them being protected, them being inside a storm panel or storm window or something of that nature. And it's always important in those circumstances that there's plenty of ventilation during the summer months. Otherwise, you get heating and condensation, and stained glass windows can't withstand that. So was there information about ventilation of the stained glass windows as part of the application? I think there are two applications there.
Sorry, before your staff answers that, how is that necessary information for you to vote on the grant? The question is whether or not the property and the improvements proposed are, like whether the property is worthy of a grant. That's the question.
Yeah, it's marginal. I mean, the appearance of the storm panels or whatever they are has an impact on the heritage attributes. So I think we should have information on whatever is in front of them. In the case of Chalmers, I think it is really that storm panel that we're concerned with. So its appearance is part of the, affects the heritage attributes. So, I mean, but I agree, it's marginal.
Mr. Newman?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I believe all members of the committee know this, but we're at a point right now where all these applications have been supported by staff, either through delegated authority or they've been brought to committee. So the permits themselves have all been approved. And we have received an application for grants, and we're processing those grant applications. So I hear the concerns with the delegated authority and what we as staff have been delegated by council to review and approve. But today we're looking at the grants, so we're not in a position to go back and change the technical merits of the permit itself. So like I say, I think you all know that, but just I want to reiterate that if we have to go back at some point, perhaps with council direction, and look at the delegated authority bylaw, perhaps that's what we need to do if this is an issue of concern.
Yeah, but thank you, Mr. Newman. And what you've said in a shorter form is that discussions on the technical aspects of the permits is not in order. That's what you've said, and that's what I've said. So I would appreciate it if members of the committee would take me seriously when I say that we're discussing the grants and not the technical aspects of the permits. I don't see. Okay, so that's questions. We'll go to members of the public.
Just very briefly, staff person said that the new season for grants under this form is now beginning. So I believe that there is some sort of a limit on how many can be handled in a year based on how much is in the pot, so to speak, right? So I had a look at them all. I was impressed with the reports and the detail, and I think they're all worthy. So I guess we can't really say anything more.
Thank you. I notice everyone seems to be using my microphone from council.
I wanted to ask about 3722 Highway 2. Have I got the numbers right? Yes? I wonder if this is supposed to relate to heritage attributes. And I am wondering about this barrel vaulted arch, or I'm not sure what to call it. But I'm also wondering, is that a heritage attribute? And when was it built? Not the building. The building's, I think, fairly early. But it has had some improvements, in quotation marks. The doorway, for instance, has been changed, and it's not certainly original. I think I don't believe the shutters are original, and they don't fit. And so there are things that maybe somebody is working on improving the facade and getting it back to where it was, but I have in the back of my mind that vaulted thing wasn't there before, and I happened to go by and think, oh my God, what's this? So I may be wrong, but I think it's if it's not an attribute and it isn't old, and I realize you can't say this window's old and this window's new, but this is a very striking feature on the facade at this point, and I think you should just ensure that that is something you want to see preserved. You may not.
Thank you. Any other members of the public? Staff has an opportunity to respond to any questions. I guess specifically there's the question about the heritage attribute of the last grant application.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. In response to the last comment about the barrel vaulted porch, this attribute is listed in the designation bylaw. It does note it as a modern addition. However, the repairs that the applicant is making also address some water issues in relation to the limestone facade. And so staff are of the opinion that this is a repair of a feature that was necessary and that the grant would be funded for this use.
Okay, so even though the vaulted roof is not an original feature, the work is to preserve the facade, which is supported by the grant application process. Thank you. Okay, so we need to move the recommendation. Do we need it all as one, right? So it's all one big recommendation with the 8 clauses for the 8 different properties. Moved by Peter. Seconded by Jamie. Any discussion? Yes, Don.
I'm going to vote in favor. I think it's certainly very appropriate, but I have to register concern that procedures we're following are seriously in jeopardy. These have all been approved under delegation as minor alterations. Most of them are not minor; they're substantial, and the committee should have the opportunity to provide input. Most of them need visits. This barrel vaulted porch appears to be subsiding. That's why the water is draining, so we need to know if it's being properly fixed. So this does have nothing to do with the grants, but I think it's a place where we really have to make a statement that the procedures are not acceptable.
Any other discussion? Because we'll vote, and just remind the members that this is a vote in favor of allocating the grant money in our fund for these projects. All those in favor? Opposed? And that carries. Thank you. The next item is a heritage permit for 1080 Sydenham Road and 927 Purdy's Mill Road. Item 5 on page 5 of the agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The subject property is known as the Cataraqui Cemetery. It's got 2 civic addresses on Sydenham Road and one on Purdy's Mill Road. It's approximately 47 hectares in size and is located in what was once known as Cataraqui Village. The application is under Section 33 of the Heritage Act, and it's submitted to request approval to construct a 24-foot by 4-foot wide pedestrian bridge over the forest pond, which is located in the northeast corner of the subject property, as you can see before you. The new bridge is to be of curved arch design, constructed of decorative black metal and with a cedar plank deck. The bridge is to be anchored into the banks by concrete footings, which are proposed to be concealed by vegetation and or stone veneers. The proposed bridge will provide easier pedestrian access to the north side of the landscape pond. This application was originally submitted last April, following comments received during their first circulation, as well as comments from this committee at a site meeting. The applicants requested that it be put on hold to evaluate those comments and to make changes to the proposed design. The Cataract Cemetery is a National Historic Site. It was originally inscribed in 1938 to recognize the burial site of Sir John MacDonald. It was then amended in 2011 to include the whole property as one of the best examples of a medium-sized rural cemetery in Canada. The subject property is also designated under Part 4 of the Heritage Act from 2014. That bylaw notes as one of its attributes its picturesque qualities and features, notably the uneven topography of rolling hills, ravines, swales, streams, 3 ponds, and the naturalistic landscape. The revised design includes a gently arched bridge with a decorative black metal railing and cedar decking. The decorative railings, black metal railings, reflect the use of black iron throughout the cemetery, including those around plot enclosures and at the entrance gates of both Sydenham and Purdy's Mill Roads. The use of wood and stone also reflect the traditional materials found throughout the property. The proposed footings are to be concrete, buried in the bank of the pond. The applicants wish to conceal them using vegetation or stone veneer. Now, staff don't object to the use of concrete in this case, as it will provide a solid and safe base for the new bridge. However, bright white concrete can detract from the heritage value of this carefully landscaped feature. So staff recommend that the concrete be tinted in a gray tone to minimize the contrast between the landscaping and the bright concrete, and to encourage the use of stone where practical. The completed alterations will aid in enhancing and conserving the heritage character of this place and its surroundings. Upon review of the application materials, as well as the applicable policies and legislation, staff have no concerns with this application. We did circulate to internal departments who didn't provide any outstanding concerns. We also circulated to this committee through DASH. While most of the comments received indicate overall support, there was one matter raised pertaining to the use of concrete. It was suggested that the applicants consider the use of stone in place of concrete for the footings, and staff have forwarded these comments onto the applicants, who responded noting that they would actually prefer the use of stone, but they are concerned about the safety and stability of the bridge, which is why they're continuing to propose concrete. They do note that they're hoping to conceal the concrete using vegetation and or stone veneers, and staff support this, the use of concrete footings, and recommend the tinting, as I mentioned earlier. Mr. Chair, upon review of this application and the comments we received, we recommend approval.
Thank you. Questions only from members of the committee regarding this application? Sherman?
My question earlier was, what color is the galvanized steel going to be in its finished state?
Mr. Chair, it'll be black.
Any other questions? Okay, members of the public. Oh, sorry, Don.
This question of use of concrete, I just wondered if the applicants can say a bit more about how the bridge is to be supported. I mean, the drawing, which is on page 178 in our package, suggests there's rather substantial concrete abutments, but and you know, we're asking them to try to do better, but isn't it possible just to support the bridge on sort of sonotube footings so you really don't see the concrete? You can put stones all around that. So I wonder if they could respond to the details of the footings.
Mr. Chair, I don't believe the applicants are here today, but it's our understanding that these plans have been designed to meet the requirements of engineering and building code. So they were concerned. They want this to. If you've been to this Cataract Cemetery, you know the effort that they put into the landscaping of this property. It is substantial investment and a priority for them. So I would like to assume that this concrete, which they're building, will be safe for the use and the enjoyment of this bridge, and will be as concealed and discreet as much as possible. I hope that's some assurance. But
thank you. So we're in questions, but when we come to deliberations, you can have an opportunity to comment further. Members of the public?
Just very briefly, I had similar concerns to what were just raised, and I think if you were to build it in stone only, it would take quite a bit more skill, and would maybe require, a highly qualified and experienced mason. And it's only a short span, sure, but you might be able to do something with concrete a lot easier. And then, if you were to do that, I would favor trying to sort of clad it in stone. So that it does fit in with the environment there. It is a pretty important site nationally, so.
Thank you. Any other members of the public? Seeing none, we need a mover and a seconder for the recommendation. Moved by Councillor Schell, seconded by Sherman. So you see the recommendation. It's basically, it's Part 4 property, so it's asking for approval of a permit in order to install a bridge. So with the first clause talks about the work, and then the two conditions, as you see there, one to do with natural stone, one to do with concrete. Any discussion? Peter.
Thank you. I'm not going to support this, and I'm not going to support this because according to, on page 167-68, according to the bylaw under the Ontario Heritage Act, the things that were outlined in that bylaw, picturesque qualities and features, and variety of mature native, non-native plants, etc. This 21st century bridge, I think, has nothing to do, fundamentally, in my judgment, with what the bylaw outlined as the very distinctive and important features of this park or of this cemetery. I think it's a mistake, and so I can't support it.
Thank you. Any other comments? Discussion? Yes, Don.
I think I understand some of Peter's concerns, but I think the owners, managers are aware that people need to cross or travel conveniently from one area to another, and a pedestrian bridge is maybe not essential, but it's desirable. And I'm also impressed by the way they improved the design from the first version, which I think was not very sympathetic to the picturesque setting of the cemetery. I think this is a significant improvement, and I hope it will turn out to be very acceptable in the circumstances.
Sherman.
I just want to point out on page 168, the very bottom paragraph, a statement: the thoughtful and ornate landscaping of this property is a significant part of the heritage value. I believe this design, this application is both thoughtful and ornate and consistent with the character of the site.
Thank you. Mr. Vice Chair, I'd like to comment. Yes,
I recognize you.
So I partly agree with Peter's position that the bridge is not necessary, and I would say that if it was a bridge for motor vehicles, I would also oppose it. But because it is a bridge, a pedestrian bridge, which don't get proposed very often, especially in a heritage setting, I think it actually is a nice little addition. And as it states in that same paragraph, it opens up the space north of the pond, which is not currently as functional. So it has that very important practical application. We want our heritage spaces to be used and enjoyed, and Cataraqui Cemetery is one of our premier heritage locations in Kingston. So to me, the question is whether the design is welcome in the setting, and although it is a modern design, I'm happy that it does enhance the heritage value of the property, and so I will indeed support it. Thank you.
Return the chair.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Okay, so we will vote on the recommendation in the package. All those in favor? Opposed? And that carries. Well, we're on the second last page of the agenda. Item number 6, pre-application consultation, 55 Ontario Street. So the procedure for this, there is a presentation, I believe, from the applicant. The staff will introduce it, and the applicant's presentation is subject to a 10-minute time limit. They will be able to answer questions after that, and then committee members and members of the public will have an opportunity to comment. But as it is a pre-consultation, it's not, I just want to point out a few things that it's not. It's not a statutory public meeting. It's not a planning committee meeting. It is not a meeting where a decision is made. The purpose of this pre-consultation is for our input and the input of members of the public to the applicant. So suggestions and comments to the applicant about the proposed work. And of course, always from a heritage standpoint, right? So comments, discussion about the heritage attributes on the site and how it fits in with the plans. That's the scope of this conversation. Go ahead.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. So just quickly before I turn it over to the applicants who have asked for this opportunity, just to orient everybody, this is 55 Ontario Street. It's the Kingston Dry Dock and Pump House property, formerly known as the home of the Marine Museum of the Great Lakes. And as part of a larger public consultation visioning program, the applicants wish to gain some preliminary feedback and comments from a heritage impact and conservation perspective. Today, the owners are proposing a residential development on this property, and as well as the adaptive reuse of the heritage buildings on the property. And the site is also proposed to include a program park, open space component, and be tied into the waterfront trail. The property is designated under Part 4 of the Heritage Act, originally in 1984, and then it was amended in 2007. The Kingston Dry Dock was inscribed as a National Historic Site in 1978, which includes not only the dry dock itself, but the entire shipyard complex, including the buildings, the gate, and all supporting structures. The cultural heritage attributes, as outlined in the bylaw, include the complex as a whole, particularly the original pump house, gate, dry dock, and related constructions, which operated as a cohesive unit. The pump and steam engine, which is in situ, and the original 90-foot tall square limestone chimney, which has a 15-foot pyramidal base. I would note that a proposal similar to what's before you today will require various Planning Act approvals, as well as formal Heritage Act approval, which would come back to this committee for consultation purposes at a future time. So the applicants and agents, IBI Group and ERA Architects are here, and I understand they have a short presentation. So I'll turn it over to them, Mr. Chair.
And just as you come over, Mr. Lear, if you could just clarify, is this property in the Old Sydenham Heritage Conservation District?
It is not, Mr. Chair.
Right, so it's Part 4 designated, not Part 5 designated.
Correct.
Right, so thank you, everybody, and Mr. Chair, and members of the committee, and members of the public. As was noted, this is not a formal public meeting in any sense. It's a pre-consultation meeting, and we'd requested the opportunity to come before Heritage Kingston to introduce the project thus far, and also to get some feedback as we develop our plans and move towards creation of applications. So with me today is Brendan Stewart from ERA Architects. He's a lead landscape architect on the project, and also Lindsay Reed, who's a lead heritage architect on the project. We have a number of other consultants on the team as well, including the building architect, as well as a number of other expertises involved. So the intention today is just take you through the site and the brief presentation that we have, and then to hear your feedback and hopefully answer some questions. I'll turn it over.
We just want to put it on full screen mode. Thank you. Just use this.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. I'll be brief because Ryan has actually covered a lot of what I was going to say. We want to emphasize that it's a great privilege to work on national historic sites. So this project is a real gem for us to be working on right now. Just in terms of the built assets on this site, the dry dock and the pump house date back to about 1889. They were completed by 1892, and those are the original structures that remain here. The pump house structure is actually quite interesting to me because it really reads as one building, but it's actually a collection of 4 buildings that have progressed over time. So of course there's the original pump house with the chimney, and then of course the interior of the dynamo building that overlooks the waterfront. There's the machine and shop forge that's attached to it. So that's the one that has the metal cladding on the exterior that makes it look like a limestone kind of inspired building. The third building is actually the little one at the end that has been heavily renovated. That was the paint storage building that came in during the Second World War. And then the last piece that kind of brings it all together is the pipe bending building that was built in 1942. So this operated as a shipbuilding facility until 1968 on a lease basis from the government, and then was altered and accommodated as a marine museum. It has been recently disposed of by Fibro, and the owner took possession of it in 2016. So as Ryan mentioned, the city is the Heritage Authority managing change that happens on this site. That happens as part of the federal disposal process. So in terms of guiding documents, we're looking at the designation bylaw as well as the federal commemorative integrity statement.
Thanks, Lindsay and Mark. So I'm going to just take you really quickly through some of our preliminary thinking about the site as a whole. We're looking at the entire property. And I should mention that we met, I guess, last week with a bunch of city staff, including Ryan and folks from the Parks Department and engineering services, et cetera. Part of the challenge of this site is actually figuring out how to add new housing to it, and we'll talk about that as part of the proposal, to deliver the waterfront trail, ideally to adaptively reuse the collection of buildings, and to create an engaging public realm. There's a lot of goals, and we're really looking at it in a holistic way. There's a bunch of moving pieces, and it's quite complex, so we're certainly very open to feedback and any questions related to that. But I just wanted to premise what we're saying, what I'm presenting right now, with the idea that this is quite preliminary, and most of what we've been focusing on actually from a public realm perspective so far is trying to figure out the circulation, the sort of pedestrian and vehicular circulation requirements, because there, you can imagine with a site with these types of shapes, It's actually very complex and complicated. So the diagram that we've got on the top left there, hopefully that's legible, that's illustrating the sort of water edge zones of the site, which, our intent is to make as much of that publicly accessible as possible. So we're looking at all kinds of examples from around the world and from around Ontario. Some of these images, quite a bit of them have actually come from park staff. We've been engaging park staff on good examples from their perspective about how to manage some of these conditions and how to create walkways and pause points and interesting viewpoints and so on. So that's a big dimension of this is delivering the waterfront trail through the site and how that works. There's the open space at the point to the east of the complex of buildings that is another really interesting zone. It would be great at some point maybe for the committee to actually do a walk around, I would think, for those of you who haven't, to see the conditions. But we see great opportunity here again for thinking through a very unique space that could happen. There's seawall reconstruction and contamination issues that are part of this as well. But this is a very exposed portion of the site that we think could become a focal point. There might be opportunities for public art or for some kind of viewing inspired destination, something that maybe is inspired by the Martello Towers. The complex that Lindsay talked about, we're at a very preliminary phase right now. We were on site last week, taking a pretty careful look inside the buildings. We've been on site several times, but a more thorough look last time to really understand the adaptive reuse feasibility of the buildings. So in terms of potential uses, there's still a lot of analysis happening at this point. I don't think we have a firm proposal yet, but that will be a big part of this. So whether it's residential, whether there's some commercial activity, whether there's a restaurant or a cafe, all of these things, we're trying to think through what's possible. But from a public realm perspective, obviously that all needs to work really well, and that needs to create sensitive relationships between the building and the dry dock and the public realm. So again, a bunch of images that we're looking at that have conditions like that in other places. The dry dock itself, the dry dock is one of the attributes on the site. There's an image at the bottom left that shows just how impressive, an engineering feat this complex is. It shows the dry dock when the water had been removed for shipbuilding purposes. We're really interested in figuring out how, as a very unique destination along the emerging waterfront trail, you might be able to create something really interesting here that allows public access to the dry dock and water access ultimately. You've got really interesting sheltered conditions. The water moves, of course, but you're lower than the surface area, which creates a unique microclimate. So we think there may be interesting opportunities to actually get down to water level, possibly on floating boardwalks or different types of accessible spaces that would allow different activities to happen that would bring you in close proximity to the walls to be able to sort of interpret them close up, but also to create interesting places for different activities. One of the examples there is a floating wetland. This is actually in the Canary Wharf district of London. It's a wonderful precedent, we think, because that is more of a sort of water quality and cleaning function, but aesthetically there's also interesting opportunities, we think, for interpreting the space and creating more layers of interest. I'll turn it over to Mark, and again, we're more than happy to answer any questions or receive comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Brendan. I neglected to introduce myself, so my name is Mark Tao. I'm a planner with IBI Groups. We're providing professional planning services on the project, including helping guide Planning Act applications that would be required, including official plan amendment, zoning bylaw amendment, site plan control. I'll start off just noting these are actually two properties. There used to be one, there are actually now two. So the one property is the dry dock and the pump house building, and then the second property is actually the pier. So they've been recently separated when the federal government sold them. So That being the case, though, the owner does want to develop the site holistically, looking at both the vacant parcel, the pier, and then also adaptive reuse for the pump house and dry dock. So what we've done so far on the new development portion is really look at kind of the units that are required for the site to make the project viable, including adaptive reuse of the pump house, museum, and the dry dock. And that is about 300 units. And that then taking that and putting into a building form with the associated parking, and then taking that building form and trying to shape it in a way that minimizes impacts and responds respectfully to the heritage values of the site. So as part of that, we looked at kind of what's the best type of massing for that many units in terms of minimizing impacts on the adjacent properties. So shadowing in particular, moving through the different seasons, we looked at a few different iterations of the shape. December always being, or wintertime always being the worst case scenario. And the one thing I'll just point out, the value of this particular shape that we've kind of been moving towards is that we're able to retain, at the worst case scenario, sunlight on the northern end of the dry dock as well as on Navy Memorial Park. So that's kind of been some of the considerations looking at building envelopes and how best to make the site work with the needs of the development, while also respecting the heritage attributes of the site. So we'll leave it there, and I'm sure there'll be questions, comments, and we can respond to those. We do have some of the other earlier iterations we looked at throughout the process. So 6 kind of different building designs, envelopes, some taller and skinnier, some lower and wider. So that's just kind of been part of the process up till now. So thank you, and welcome any questions.
Thank you. So again, pre-consultation, all comments welcome. You can ask questions about the details of the presentation. We don't go through the regular process, right? It's just, yeah. So at this point, just questions of clarification about things that were in the presentation, perhaps. Yeah, and then later on, you'll have a chance to give your feedback. Yes, Councillor Schell.
Thank you. First question is about the property is now divided in 2, but I believe that doesn't change the designation in any way. Could I just get confirmation of that even if property's been severed, that doesn't sever a designation or anything?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm sure my colleagues will correct me if I'm wrong, but it's my understanding that the property was designated as a whole, and the bylaw was registered against the entirety of the property, so it should still be with the entirety of the property until the bylaw is amended, which hasn't happened. So my understanding is it stayed for the entire property.
I'll just confirm that if the bylaw were amended, it would be council that amends it, not the owner. Okay. And my second question was about I was very interested to hear you talking about walking on the southeast portion below the limestone building. We weren't allowed to, so has something changed that is now safe? Because public weren't allowed to walk there. So I was surprised when you suggested we go. Could you confirm whether that's now a safe area?
I can't confirm that it's a safe area. And I probably shouldn't have suggested that we go in that particular zone. We've certainly been there with safety gear to take a look. But I think so. We should get back to you about where on the property would be safe to go. There are certainly ways to see those portions that are unsafe from safe portions of the property. But I think the idea of looking around on site is probably a helpful one. I don't know if my colleagues would add anything to that.
I'm not clear on that part of it. Certainly the site, as the city is aware, there have been many studies done both by the feds and in support of cities' investigations about the condition of the site, and that's part of the challenge of the site is the amount of remediation work that's needed. But certainly if anybody wants to have a site tour or site visit, we can coordinate that, including access to the building if that's desired as well. So.
Yes, Jamie.
This was alluded to in the presentation, but I presume that the logic of proposing a 25-story high-density apartment or condo building there is based on the need for the owner to recoup the financial investment, primarily.
Just through you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, so it's a 20-story building. So just to clarify, because I didn't describe that, so there's two components to the building. There's a podium, and then there's a tower. So the total height of the building is 20 stories, as envisioned in the plans thus far. And so yes, obviously to do anything, excuse me, with the site, as the city obviously knows in terms of their considerations of purchasing this site and similar sites in the past, there's certainly undertakings that have to be done in terms of making the site safe. So I've said before, the site has pretty much everything you can think of in terms of brownfields, heritage. The shore wall is obviously in poor condition. Some of the preliminary investigations that have been done include just restoring the shore wall around just the pier and putting a new wall in would be in excess of $5 million. So that's just for a new shore wall, not including any kind of remediation work. So aside from that, there's also obviously the maintenance of the dry dock and the pump house museum as well. So there's certainly a cost to maintaining the site or even just restoring the site, never mind a building, to its, to I guess, a safe condition. So yeah, that's certainly a consideration.
Peter.
Thank you. Two questions with respect to the waterfront walkway. In the downtown area, I guess this is a question to staff. How much of the existing waterfront walkway is on public property?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I don't have an answer for you off the cuff, and I would hate to try and guess at this. I would say that if we don't own it as the municipality, we have an easement or right-of-way over the lands, but that's information I can try to track down for you.
Thank you. It's important information, I think, because my reading of this document is that all of the waterfront walkway around through this property will be on private land. There is no public access or no public land between the water line and the pier or the dry dock area, etc. And one can't do with this property what one did behind the Simcoe Apartments, which was that they allowed, I think it was Homestead, to dump the land that was being excavated for the apartment buildings that were being built years ago along Ontario Street, and therefore they created in front of what had been private land an area which is public, which is where the walkway around the base of that goes. And then, of course, when you get to the yacht club, there is no public walkway through that. It goes up to the street. So in the little bit of this that I know suggests to me that there has been a policy which has meant, or a practice which has meant that much of the downtown area of central Kingston certainly has been on public land. And this represents a bit of an exception, it seems to me, because it's going to be a very important part of the public walkway, and it's not just a minor amount of space. The question which arises from this is the commitment, or the responsibility might be the better word, of the owners, to maintain this. And maybe this goes back to the notion of an easement. But the waterfront walkway is a very important thing, and the continuation of it, the completion of it, if you like, is very important. And I'd like to ask about how it is that, what responsibility you anticipate taking, or if this has been thought about, to maintaining in this crucial area this public right-of-way on private property.
Thank you for your question. I'll start, and then Mark may jump in. So at this point, I mean, this is really one of the critical aspects of the project, is figuring out all of these questions about ownership and access and ultimately management and responsibility. So I think, I mean, in a large part, that's what our meeting last week with the city was starting to talk through, because it's quite complicated, figuring out how all of that happens and what all the options are that are on the table. I think what I can say is that our client's interest is in making this as public as possible, and in figuring out a way that works for everybody. We haven't committed to whether it's an easement, whether it's in public ownership, whether it's in private ownership with public access yet, because it's just too early in the process to know, and we really need to talk that all through. But it's, you know, in my mind, that's the biggest critical question from a public interest perspective on this project, in addition to heritage, is how is that all going to work? Because there's obviously a lot of potential for it to be a really great public space. I don't know if you'd add anything to that, Mark?
Sure, a couple things. So, as Brendan said, that's the public park space, the open space, waterfront access, especially for the public, is a very important part of this project. Even just kind of views down Lower Union Street and from Ontario Street over to the water and being able to access it, all key principles for how the site could be developed. And the owner said, you know, ultimately he would love to be able to make all of this public space, as much of it as possible, and all of it if possible. The site, through the development of the building itself, would be required to have a certain amount of amenity space, which could be contained all within the building, so to meet the planning requirements. The rest of it, all the way around the building, the dry dock itself, if it's possible to make it public, that's what they'd like to do. There are certain entitlements that the city would have to parkland on the site as part of development. So currently the rule is that 10% of the development parcel would have to be given to the city for parkland. There's options for actual ownership by the city versus just taking an easement. For example, Battery Park is just an easement. Actually, the city doesn't own that. It's an easement because there's contaminated lands underneath Battery Park, so the city didn't want to take the liability of that. So there's various mechanisms where the city can obtain rights to access or ownership. There's also the questions of brownfields funding for remediation and give and take on that for parkland acquisition by the city, bonusing, all those different things. So that's because there's so many different moving pieces around that part of it. It's hard to say at this point exactly how much would be public, but I think the desire certainly is to make as much of it publicly accessible as possible. So.
Thank you. I just want to point out, as chair of the Heritage Committee, that the public access piece is not strictly a heritage piece, but the aspects of sight lines that were mentioned and how the public access would impact the heritage is a heritage piece. Yes, Chair.
Thank you for this. Like the presentation, and the question that comes to my mind is at what cost to conservation, and to guide development. I just think of remarkable spaces and the remarkable dry dock and the remarkable tower, the tower that might indicate form and height, and the dry dock that might implicate impact, like, you know, the pump house that moved this water out of this space. And I can definitely see a juxtaposition between what's it going to cost to get the preservation and at what cost to develop the new. And I would just say guide the new to be as conservative as possible, but also to illustrate that it is paying for what we're getting. And in as much as appropriate development can be considered, I think, paying for what we're getting. And if the public can get the restoration, we need to be accepting of at what cost. And I'd love to see the potential of the restoration of the site.
Thank you. So that, I don't know if that was a question, but we are going to have another round after members of the public to give our direct input and our suggestions. So if there's any more questions, those are in order, otherwise we'll go to members of the public. Members of the public, okay, so go ahead.
All right,
Please state your name and address.
I am Rhea Wood. I live at 64 Ontario Street. I have been a resident of that area since 1945, on and off. I love that area and very familiar with it, with its cultural and heritage aspects, its environmental aspects, which I think have been overlooked. The fact that it is an area where there is a tremendous variety of species of wild birds, animals that live in that area. That area is going to be completely destroyed, and a huge tower of a building like that. And I've spoken to several residents in the area all the way around, and they feel, as I do, that a building of that size is going to destroy the inherent cultural heritage of the Marine Museum and the dry dock and the harbor area, that is the last remnant of that area that we have in Kingston.
Thank you. I see there's a couple members of the public on this side. Everyone needs to state their name and actually really just have to identify yourself as a resident of Kingston, but if you want to state your address, you can do that, and you need to come to the mic. Go ahead.
Yeah, Frank Dixon, Williamsville resident. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the presentation. I, among others, have been following the file closely, so it's good to see sort of the next step as to where we could be going. So the heritage elements are going to impact everything else, and I'm going to be talking about some of the things they are going to impact. I think that seems to be in play. The city had a chance to buy this from the federal government, but would have to incur a very large expense for the brownfield considerations, something in the order of $20 million. They turned that down, and then it became open on the market and was bought by the fellow who has hired this team. So, as proposed in the package, 20 to 25 stories may be the tallest building in Kingston if it's approved as presented. I believe that right now it's St. Mary's Cathedral at 242 feet. So that's something to consider. My own view right now, I'm not going to say never or anything, but the scope and the size of the proposal is out of proportion with the heritage character of the neighborhood. I'd be very concerned about the safety of construction when you're that close to the water's edge and when you're that close to a brownfield site of this size. Speaking from the tech standpoint there. Couple of interesting ideas I came up with. Given that this was a dry dock for the better part of a century, and that there has been some discussion on a deep water dock in Kingston being installed to accommodate large ships that may want to come in and have their passengers tour Kingston, that this may be a possibility. It may require a bigger site than what we have there, and it's been talked about off Kingston Pen and various things, so. I think the people on the committee were talking about the challenge of a large number of new residents on the site and their access to the site, given that the site is some distance from Ontario Street. And that's certainly a very valid concern. Ontario Street bends near there. It's a busy area anyway. So my idea there, and I'm not approving the project by any means, but a tunnel might be necessary coming off Ontario Street to have access to underground parking for the residents of the building. Might be a concept to investigate. I think it would be essential for however the site is developed to have some historical connection with the dry dock and to explain in detail how it worked. There's been some panels installed there to explain the heritage and historical nature of the site, and those are outstanding work by the city, research that was done there. I walked by there the other day to refresh my memory on the site to prepare for this meeting. So I'd like to see that expanded, I think. I have in fact walked on the site a number of years ago. I haven't been down there recently, but they didn't have it blocked off explicitly, so I'm quite familiar with it. And the area that you're describing as the park possibility on sort of the top right, that really does have interesting possibilities. And I think maybe one of your slides showed that you envision a potential walkway sort of going across there, sort of at the end of the dry dock over to where the new residential is going to be, and then possibly around that. So that's very interesting. And I just want to see what else have I got here. I think I'm getting at most of them. A question on the setbacks from the water's edge. I'm not sure if the official plan in terms of the flowing water applies here. I know that was a 30-meter setback that was discussed in the official plan. That may only apply if you have rivers or streams nearby. But clearly, if you have that in place here, you have nowhere you can build, because that entire section is within 30 meters of the water in some way or other, right? So it wasn't entirely clear to me just what the setbacks are on that sort of like a narrow piece of land, long and narrow. You talked about the shadow studies, and this is a major consideration, I think, because the buildings that are there have been there for some time, and they have rights according to that fact. So I was glad to see that you were modifying the building shape to try to account for that. So shadow studies can be tricky, and there have been some flaws in OMB hearings on shadow studies. For example, one last fall, which I tended to, I'm doing a paper on that, actually, to try to share that with the city from my tech standpoint. And my final point is that, just from a presentation standpoint, it's an excellent presentation, but my own preference would be to have fewer images per slide. It's kind of crowded on the slide. Like you've got 4, 6, or 8 images, and they're all kind of different. I know you want to show variety there, but if you have maybe 2 or 3 images per slide, just in terms of how the eye processes all that information, that might be more effective. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members of the public? Yeah, please just come forward. There's no particular order, just everyone will get a chance to speak. So, just to remind members of the public, because the last speaker mentioned some aspects like setbacks and things like that, those are planning aspects that we wouldn't have as part of our heritage consideration, but still valid points. Go ahead.
My name is Donald Mitchell, and I live at 43 Gibson Avenue, but I'm also speaking on behalf of Sydenham Street United Church, and that perspective, though not for my employer. Since I first saw this proposal shaping up, this is going to come down to, I'm going to do this sort of as quick as I can, but it's going to come down to this package of features that are optimally presented to buy building height. So it's really about how tall can we go, and what are we going to have to do in order to go that tall. What I'd like the committee to really think seriously about is the intent of the heritage. So the intent of the heritage on the site, but also the intent of the heritage all around it. And I'll speak to that more in a sec. And it's my belief that this tall building is not the intent of the site. And I have heard Carl Bray speak to why sections of the city were not included in the Heritage District, and this is an area of the city that was discussed. And I understand the desire of the applicant to do this, but I think that the heritage buildings and the local areas will be diminished by a building of this height. So I also had a question about the official plan because we spent, 2 years or something talking about all of this, and I'm not sure how this falls in or fits, but my hope would be that this would fulfill what we have in this official plan, the updated version that we've done, and including all the heritage aspects. The big thing I wanted to talk about was the skyline. So Carl Bray will explain this better, and I'm sure he'll get lots of opportunity to comment on this, but when we were talking about the Heritage District and the churches that are in it, and I work in a building that's probably the tallest building within the Heritage District, and having been up to the parapet wall and actually looked out from the highest point of the Heritage District, Peter will be really glad that you see trees and nothing but trees, and I can show you the photos. It's incredible. But I am concerned that this building where it is, I can stand at Winston Churchill School and I can see the spire of Sydenham Street United Church. I can go over onto the far side of Sydenham Street and I can look back from almost Skelton Park and I can see the spires of various buildings. And I'm concerned about this building, and to be cutesy, they used to use the spires of these buildings to guide ships. So it is a part of that intangible heritage we have. I'm concerned that this building is going to diminish the Heritage District. I think that the Annandale and various buildings all have views, and I'm worried that 25 stories is going to be too tall for that. And I do believe, maybe it's a stretch, but I do believe that we should be satisfying the Heritage District even on its borders, and I don't consider the border across the street. I consider it the adjacent areas, particularly when there are part 4 buildings that are in those areas. So I think I've mentioned the major things that come up at this point. I know this is early days, but the other thing that really bothers me about the way we sometimes do our business as a city is we compartmentalize things. And it concerns me that this is sort of compartmentalizing, let's make a decision in this very small area, but I actually think that this is very intrinsic to the whole downtown core. And so I hope that you'll think carefully about that. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Who wants to speak next?
I have to say I'm very much Helen Finley, and in concert with the previous speakers, I wanted to point out a couple of things. One is the mention by Frank Dixon of the Deepwater Port and the possibilities there. That has been around for a long time as an idea, and if you look forward in our whole tourism program, this would be a fabulous thing to have happen, because I've traveled to places where the cruise ships come in. There won't be a ton of cruise ships coming in here, we know that. But first of all, they come without cars, and that is a real bonus. And there are a lot of tours now that go to Fort Henry and go back up to 401 and drive to the shopping center and have lunch. They don't even hardly set foot in the downtown. And I think that idea of cruise ships, the other one is a shuttle from Fort Henry is another one, and it brings people, and of course people bring money. That's what tourism's all about, really. So I think that should be investigated. I, too, have trouble with the height, which I think will dwarf the heritage. There's a children's story about the little house in New York that's been around since the 30s, and it's this little house that finally gets so lost because, and it's abandoned at that point, because of the high-rise buildings and the descendants of the original owners, when it was a little farmhouse, came and bought it and moved it out of there back to its original setting. And you could just see that it had no meaning in there. So I think there has to be a consciousness of that. The other thing I would suggest is that you not just, this discussion has been about from the land, that you not just look at your project that way. I was fortunate enough to spend a number of summers on Garden Island, so I went out in boat and there all the time. And when you see the skyline and what's happened to it from the water, and Garden Island's about 2 miles, I don't know how far it is to Wolf Island, but you do get a perspective along the edge, and it is, I often think, would they ever have allowed that if they'd considered it from the water? So I would like to suggest that you think about that. And is it, I just put this question to you, is it a reasonable thing in order to have a developer preserve designated properties that are National Historic Sites, that that person should be allowed to develop 2 or 3 more stories just for doing that? I mean, those buildings are not in crumbling condition. The dry dock has been restored a number of years ago, I believe. So this will be a mostly adaptive use situation, and so I don't think it is one where it's appropriate to do bonusing. I wonder how many, you said 300 units, and how many units per floor is that going to be? And I'm not sure how the developer goes about arriving at the number of units. What happens is council and the city and the public say, we need this number of units and this number of stories in order to make it feasible. That means if we don't get that, we can't build it. But, you know, there are different ways of looking at it, because I don't believe the city ever says, well, all right, you show us your figures. They just believe that. And there may be other ways of looking at it if you had the evidence. So the proportion we don't know, and it would be hard for a developer to come up over 40 years how much money they're going to make on that building. But I do think it's worth considering, and it shouldn't be accepted as a statement that is necessarily true. And also the percentage of investment, the percentage that is profit in all the figuring. So I hope that there'd be a healthy discussion about that.
Thank you. Any other members of the public wish to speak?
The residents have talked about this a lot. We walk down to that area. We use the waterfront. We have picnics over there. It's a family area. There are numerous tourists as well that we see, that we talk with, who also are there. And we have talked about the fact of the deep water dock and the cruise ships. And it seems to be a pretty general consensus of the people who live down there that this would be an excellent idea and would provide a great amount of tourist income for the city of Kingston as well, because it would bring tourists down to that area. When I have myself walked from the downtown area down towards the Marine Museum, I've run into tourists wandering in the area, and I recommend, well, just walk down a little bit further and you'll find a fabulous little area down there that's not included among skyscrapers and all the rest of it. And they walk down with me and I show it to them and say, oh, this is beautiful. So we're going to throw that away? This is an integral part of Kingston, what it was and what it should continue to be, not only for the residents, but for the people who come to see Kingston as it should be, not as just a series of huge apartment buildings. Thank you.
Thank you. So I guess that's all the members of the public that wish to speak. We're still in pre-consultation, So members of the committee may wish to offer suggestions. So maybe, I don't know, maybe I'll kick things off because I wrote down a couple of ideas. So this is just me commenting as the chair of Heritage and lifelong resident of Kingston who's aware of of Sydenham Ward, so I'm aware of the Heritage. And the aspect here that really jumps out is the maritime aspect, the maritime history. I mean, it's obvious, but it also can't be stated too many times. This was a shipyard, this was a dry dock, and cornerstone, of course, laid by Sir John A. Warships built in both World Wars, but especially the Second World War, that were part of the Battle of Atlantic, which we still commemorate every year. Warships built right in that dry dock. I'd like to see more interpretive plaques that show some of those photos and perhaps drawings of some of those small warships that were built right here in Kingston. But warships aside, the shipyard continued until very recently, actually almost until the beginning of my life. And so I never saw the shipyard in action, but it was in such a recent time that I was aware of it. And I've always wondered of what our waterfront looked like in the past. And every time I see photos of it, I'm struck by how disconnected those pictures are from what we see today. Today's culture centered around the car and asphalt and all that stuff. So, it used to be railroads and ships were dominating our waterfront. And there was actually a rail where the Sir John A. engine is outside here. That railroad used to cross by Fort Frontenac over to where Doug Furrer Park is on a span that went over the water, and the trains would come right into downtown. And what was downtown? There was all these piers that all had ships on them at all times. So this is like was mentioned by the very first member of the public, this is our last remnant of our maritime past. And yes, it's a National Historic Site, so it's protected. But in this kind of conversation, it's very easy to say, I don't like the idea of a tall building and all this, but really, here at Heritage, I mean, when I'm representing Sydenham, when I vote at council, I might be saying different things. But here at Heritage, what we need to do is what can we offer as constructive suggestions in the design? What could make this work? So the suggestion is a tall building needs to have a certain amount of income to pay for the restoration work to make this site continue to be viable, to preserve it for future generations. That's the premise, that's the hypothesis. So I'm willing to entertain that. But I would say that the foundation of all your work, and you're all going to do design work, should be the maritime aspect of the site. You can't get away from it, and you also can't lose by emphasizing it. So I would suggest you consider a nautical theme for the building itself. I was just in Norfolk, Virginia. They have a brand new museum there. It's called Nauticus, and it's next to a World War II battleship, which is a monstrous ship, the biggest ship you're ever going to see, with gigantic 16-inch guns and, just like in the war movies, but it's part of the museum. So we had the Alexander Henry. They have this gigantic battleship, Wisconsin, and then they have a whole building, which is a modern building, but it's got a nautical theme. So it fits with the ship and the building complement each other. We don't have a ship anymore in the dry dock, but that doesn't mean we can't have the exact use continue with this idea of a deep water dock. So when council discussed this in strategic priorities in the very beginning of my term as councillor, and someone threw out the number $3 million as a possibility of what it would take to install a pier that the deep water, like a deep ship with a deep draft would be able to use. So that's along the lines of the kind of numbers we're hearing for the restoration work of these existing piers, which I believe you're correct that they're piers and not wharfs. They're always referred to as wharfs, but if it juts out into the water, then it's a pier. And that's what you would need for a deep water ship as well. So, I mean, it's already there, and historically that's what was built here. It was so that large ships could moor here. So why don't we restore that use? That would be a much greater community benefit than anything you might mention when it comes to waterfront access, for the simple fact that, as Ms. Finley mentioned, it brings pedestrians into the downtown without their vehicles. Their vehicle is the gigantic ship that brings them here, but after they get off the ship, they're pedestrians. That's what revitalizes a downtown, is pedestrian activity. It would be an instant injection of activity, and that's worth its weight in gold. So that's very exciting. As far as the idea of a shuttle from Fort Henry and so on, why not a water taxi that goes across? Because we're talking about the water now. Let's get back to our maritime roots. The water was used as means of transportation. A water taxi, exactly like the tour trolley, except on the water, that goes and visits all of the sites that are the historic sites that are accessible from the water. Again, that in itself is a historic use, using the water as a means of transportation. Again, you would need a functional pier for that to work. The other thing would be the possibility of getting income from ships mooring there, similar as the Crawford Wharf does near the Holiday Inn. That's used as a tourist wharf where people actually board the ships there, and that brings income. So that's actually another source of income for the owner. I don't think it can be overstated or overlooked. So that all is consistent with the heritage aspects of this site, and I think it would really create some synergy with the pump house and the dry dock and everything there. And of course, even though the Marine Museum is gone, the aspects on the site that are fascinating to all ages are the historical aspects. So that you can always incorporate that into your design, whether it's public or private, because it provides a value to any observer, whether they're a tourist or a resident of the building or a resident of a neighboring building, to create acceptance. Is this interpretive work that would be done to highlight the history of the site? I mean, on its very surface, another tall condo building on our waterfront doesn't do anything to accentuate our heritage by itself. So that may be the price that we have to pay to get anything done on this site. But I would say if you ignore the nautical aspect and the heritage of our nautical and shipyards history, you will not be able to find a design that is accepted by the public. So I encourage you to explore those avenues. And of course, a lot of people have something to say about that, but that's all I wanted to say. Thanks. So, yes, Peter.
Thank you. This is really a comment that is directed more to staff than to the consultants who are here. But I don't know quite what a pre-application consultation is expected to be. But I do know that the only specific bit of information that we got for this meeting was the proposal for a tall apartment building on the site. I find it very difficult. I'll be stronger in my language than this. I find it improper to expect myself as a member of this committee to come and have meaningful things to say to consultants who are preparing a proposal if they don't give us any information ahead of time. And this is the responsibility not of the consultants, but of I think of the staff. I came to this pre-application consultation, which is an important part of a process, but I came without having been offered, an amount of information, ideas, some conceptualizations fleshed out that would allow me creatively to think before I came here about what was going to be discussed. It's very frustrating, and I want to express this frustration because I don't want to be at a pre-application consultation again with such an important matter as we're dealing with today, and to have as little to think about ahead of time to try and prepare some constructive remarks. I find it's frustrating. I think it's wrong, and I want to say that because I think it could be a more it could be a lot more useful an occasion if those of us who are wanting to have something to say and who's are part of the process of getting some responses, it's inadequate. Thank you.
Thank you. Who else on the committee wishes to offer comment? Jamie?
I have to admit, I had a fairly strong response to this proposal, or this idea of a proposal, and I wrote a fairly extensive comment in Dash, which isn't totally included in this document. It's missing some parts. But first of all, I would just like to say, I think the real potential of this site, particularly because of its location so close to the downtown core, is that it's a cultural regeneration project. And I was super pleased to see the reference to Canary Wharf development in London, England, and I would encourage you to look at other examples in the UK, such as Liverpool, which has had great success under the Labour Cultural Regeneration Mandate, in Glasgow and other European cities, who, of course, deal with the redevelopment of, heritage sites much older, more complex than the ones here. And I think they're a good source of best practice. I think I'm not against residential builds. I live in that area myself, in the Sydenham ward, but I think it's critical to get an appropriate balance as a mixed-use site. And, outside of protecting and preserving and acknowledging the heritage attributes of this site, as Peter and other folks have mentioned, I would suggest that the building itself could offer an aesthetic design value and could brand that site. I mean, this could be a premier site if it's balanced appropriately. So, I think there's lots of potential here, and I really like the first part of your presentation. Now, that being said, my major concern is a high-density 20 building, though I believe in the proposal it said 20 to 25 level building there. I think it would, be inappropriate for all of the reasons shared today, and it would just absolutely dwarf that site. And just again, on a more personal note, not only as a committee member, but as someone who grew up in Kingston, and I'm a community member of Kingston, this is a regular issue coming up into the development of the downtown core. Tall, modern-looking buildings. And it's a concern, and I find it tiresome. And I think, to be blunt, it reflects a lack of innovation. There's a lot of other options in which can be profitable for the private business sector, as well as helping to create a livable city, which I saw a big sign for downstairs, Livable City Awards. And I would just really encourage you to look at, there's some really, really great examples across the board. It could be a win across the board if it's balanced appropriately. Thank you.
Thank you. Just before we go on, so I've just looked up the sheet that had your comments from Dash. So are you saying that what's in the package was not everything that you wrote in Dash?
The one time I wrote something fairly extensive, it just sort of got cut off because I was explaining what I meant by a balanced mixed-use site, retail options, other options, including creative industries, public spaces, green spaces, as well as private residential. And I made a point about, if you haven't already, look at the cultural plan, Kingston Cultural Plan. There's a lot in there about spaces and the value of spaces, and I think it would be a great aesthetic as well as heritage guide point.
So just so you know, we were the heritage consultant for the culture plans. We're well acquainted with it and incorporating the sightings into this.
Yeah, I heard you, but just when you do speak, you need to speak in the microphone.
Sorry. I just wanted to emphasize that we were the heritage consultant for the Kingston Culture Plan, and so we are taking all of those ideas and all our learning experience from there and incorporating it into how we think about this project.
Thank you. Who is next to have their hand up? Councillor Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We sort of thought this might happen when the federal government sold the property, and as a city, we had already known publicly a good $20 million was going to be needed to fix up the docks because they are falling apart. Are they docks or wharfs? They're wharfs.
Understood them to be piers that we call
Okay,
wharfs,
piers.
but both appear in a wharf as a dock.
that they're falling apart, and it was going to cost the city a fortune to fix them up. So a private developer has bought this property knowing what was going to be required. The first thing that came to mind because of what we've learned today, is if those properties have been severed in two, it becomes incredibly important for this council and the city to treat it always as one package, because it's designated as one package. It would be way too easy to suddenly have this green space turned into a totally separate, and the dry dock and the buildings, the previous Marine Museum buildings, be treated as a separate parcel. It's one big parcel, which brings it to what people are talking about, this idea of a 300-unit building. We know that the Royal George down the way is selling for $1 million and up in condos, so you can see 300 units, we're talking at $750,000 each, $225 million. So we're talking huge money here that would repair the wharves, repurpose the buildings, leave lots of profit. So the balance for the city and livability is this balance of, we would like to see the property, I presume as a city, restored. I noticed one of your pictures looked like it was from the distillery district. And so the owner is going to want, if a requirement of this whole deal is to fix up the Marine Museum property, that's part of the payback. But we have to be really, really careful as a city that we recognize somebody's bought it. It's going to cost a lot of money to fix up the waterfront, and I presume as a city we would like that. But we don't want to give away the store in ugliness and massing to have the Marine Museum and the dry dock preserved. So we have a big handle. And it is up to the city. It's the waterfront walkway will be created because the city says we want that easement. We have the right to that. Interesting, when you talked about sailing, I thought about the North Block. And Mr. Tope he could probably find it pretty fast, staff could. One of the proposed designs that the city threw out as, let's do something magical on the North Block, was a building that looked like a sail. It was quite lovely. So I think that whole idea of innovative design is really important too. We want something special here. We know there's a lot of money to be made on this property by a developer. We know already, right beside their properties are going for a lot of money. So I think as a city we can really push for what we would like to see as a city on that property. So the developer could be happy, and we'll never be happy. I would prefer not another tall building on the water, big time, but there's reality, and then there's what I wish for. I also would love to see a deep water dock, but I can't imagine it would make the kind of money that you're talking about with this condo building. So, but I sure would love to see a deep water dock there. Thank you.
Who else would like to comment?
I would like
sorry.
to.
Sorry. I hate to cut you off, but it's only committee members that are permitted to comment further at this point. But there will be more public meetings, so keep your comments in store for that. Thanks. Any other members of the committee? I'm just going to mention one thing because Councillor Schell reminded me. So Block D, as an example, is some large rectangular buildings and we have many of those in Kingston, and part of that is because of the model that company uses, that they can reproduce over and over. That they've done it many times here and in other cities as well. It's safe and it's everybody's used to it, so it gets accepted in a certain sense. However, it's not inspiring in the least. So that is, I'd like you to consider that as a juxtaposition that the more you look like one of those Block D buildings, the worse it'll be for you. And the more you can be like a sail-shaped building or some kind of innovative design, because there are tall buildings in this world that are beautiful. And there always have been. Architects have always created beautiful buildings. We just don't seem to have any of them being built in Kingston these days. But that doesn't mean it can't happen. So that's your challenge as an architect, is to come up with a design that people are going to gasp at because it's so beautiful. So that's another aspect. But also, like I say, it needs to have a nautical theme or it will probably fail at this location. If there's no one else wants to, okay, you have a chance to respond and maybe give us some more ideas.
We're conscious of time, so we'll try to be brief, and we're always happy to answer questions outside of this forum. First thing, just to come to staff's defense on the point raised by Peter about not having enough information, and that's our fault. We had intended on providing more information to the committee ahead of time, so you did have that time to prepare. Unfortunately, we didn't get it to you until yesterday, I guess, or the day before. So that was not staff's part. We had asked to stay on this date just because we're trying to continue to get feedback as we progress. So we'll take the blame on that one, certainly. I'll hand some stuff off here and there. The question about the deep water dock, I'll answer that one just because it has come up over the past 18 months, I guess, or the year. And we've had that discussion with staff. And I guess analysis was done by the city. I'm not sure if it's public or formalized. They had looked at an analysis for the profitability of that, because the intention was that the city would take the lead on a deep water dock. And I guess the outcome was that it wasn't a profitable venture, I guess, for the city in that capacity. So I think there is information there about it, and the developer, I know, is open to that because that was part of the early conversations. So, if there is desire for that, I think that's still a possibility. But I know there is some information at a staff level on that. So I don't know if Lindsay, if you want to speak to some of the comments about the heritage and our design and how we would respond and what we're looking to do with the building as a heritage.
Sure. First of all, I'd like to say I very much appreciate everyone's candor in their comments today. It's very important for us to understand everyone's key interests while there's still a lot of flexibility in how this is developing. Working on a complex site like this that has layers of interest, like the councillor was talking about all the environmental remediation that needs to happen and the repairs to reconstruct the piers, is the language that we're using, at the shoreline is, one huge investment that needs to happen. When we're looking at a site like this from a heritage perspective, our office does these kind of these layers of analysis to understand the site. So first we look at it purely from its historical point of view in terms of where value lies. We look at understanding how the built features of the site have evolved over time. And then from there, in terms of understanding where development is best suited on the site, we're really looking at preserving as many of those attributes as possible and locating it so that we are preserving the landmark status of this building that it has right now. That's very important for us. We do see this as an important node along the waterfront, and it has huge potential as a destination as well. It's already a destination, but really building upon that status to make something wonderful here. And I think what Brendan's been showing in terms of how to really engage the landscape as well as the buildings is a really important part of placemaking here. We are very diligent as in thinking about all the views and the ways that this building will be looked at. I really appreciated the comment about going out to Wolf Island and looking back at the skyline and understanding that view of this. Within the designation, we are required to look at views to the building as well as out from the building to other parts of the site. There are requirements in the OP that we have to look at in terms of looking down from the Sydenham district area, as well as looking back at the cupola. So as you can imagine, it's almost a subtractive exercise when we're looking at a site like this, is we're really carving back to the most kind of selective footprint that we can work with, and then trying to really do lots of pushing and pulling in terms of what massing makes sense here. That's a huge amount of exercise that I'd like to kind of emphasize here. We do see this as a landmark site, and we do want to have some sort of spectacular architecture here, and I really do like the word gasp-worthy site in building here, and I think that's all what we're looking forward to here. As much, professionally, but as well as making sure that we create something that's a stark contrast to the heritage that's there, in terms of we're not kind of blurring how it fits in the evolution of the site, but really figuring out a way to rebrand the site, as you were saying before. So we're just going to keep plucking away at it, and the more people can provide input to us, I think the better outcome that we'll get. We really do see this as an iterative process, so we hope that everyone will engage as much as possible. I don't know if people know, but we do have a public meeting on the 9th. So if you are interested in kind of seeing how far we get to in the next week in terms of taking into account people's ideas and the broader conversation that's happened, I really do encourage people to come. Did you want to speak any more to anything, Brenda?
I don't have a whole lot to add beyond what my colleagues have said, but I just wanted to reiterate that a lot of people spoke about the huge potential for interpreting the sort of maritime history and the component parts of the dry dock and the buildings and the pump and all of the amazing stuff that we've been able to see and be inspired by. So I just want to reiterate that it's helpful to hear that. It's helps us know that we're on the right track, and I think we're going to be. We haven't shown you much detail at this point, but figuring out the interpretation and the commemoration and the sort of detailed experience that could happen here will come down the line, and I think we'll want to focus very much on interpreting that in particular, because I think it's what the site wants to do. I mean, it's there, and it's incredibly impressive, and figuring out how people can engage with that is really important.
Thank you. You probably know this already because I think I told you, Mark, but 6 of us councillors are not able to come on Tuesday to that particular meeting because of a committee meeting that will be here. But there will be other opportunities for us and for the rest of the members of the public. The meeting is where is me?
Yeah, so thanks for the plug. So it's from 6 to 8 p.m. on Tuesday at Queen's University in the Alumni Lounge, in the ARC in the Rec Center. So it's Lindsay Lambert, who's the planner of the files, have the details, but if anybody wants to know specifically, I can provide them as well. So thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Newman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just for clarification, that's a non-statutory public meeting, so it's something that the proponent is putting on just as a matter of continuing the conversation. And I think, the chair has mentioned this at the outset of this discussion, but there will be statutory processes to follow. There's an official plan and zoning bylaw amendment required on the property, so we will be having those conversations. And just for the members of the public that spoke, speaking to things like environmental impact and shadowing and some other considerations, there's a fairly comprehensive submission package that will be required to justify whatever the final outcome of the proposal is. So those technical details will form part of a complete application with the rezoning and the official plan amendment applications that we expect to get in the upcoming months. So there is a very detailed process to follow, and I do appreciate the consulting team coming out today to just sort of provide a very preliminary discussion of the ideas that are taking shape.
Thank you, Mr. Newman. Well, thank you for coming, and to be continued, I guess.
Thank you.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair. I have to depart. You're going to lose quorum. It's 1:30.
Is
So if you
Mac
need
on?
to- He's gone.
Okay,
if you
so
fit-
what votes do we have left? We'll just do them quickly.
Let's do approve all three working group reports and the fourth motion.
Okay, so the next item is 3 working group reports that we can receive quickly to get them on the record. So I need a motion to, a mover and a seconder to approve the 3 working group reports. So the heritage properties, the cultural heritage, and the heritage assets. Moved by Don, seconded by Councillor Schell. All those in favor? And that carries. And what's the other motion? Where's that? Okay, so there's a separate motion needed to receive something to the civic collection. Do you have a wording for that? Can I see that? Okay, so it's a limited edition Lionel Pink model train 1957 that it looks like it's being donated. So we need a motion to receive this item into the civic collection. Moved by Councillor Schell, seconded by Sherman. This is for the train exhibit at the Pump House Steam Museum. So all those in favor? Opposed? And that carries. Thank you. Is that it? So now I just need a motion to adjourn. Moved by Peter. All those in favor? Thank you.